Fuck the world. And don't say that I don't care. Just gotta scream fuck when I was coming.
We will defend these police officers.
Listen to police officers' commands, listen to what we tell you, and just stop. The nation needs to realize that when we tell you to do something, do it. And if you're wrong, you're wrong. If you're right, then the courts will figure it out.
We don't get to take the law, we enforce it. But at the end of the day, each and every American should go home safe. Sometimes the use of force is necessary. You need to comply with the police officer the way the system was meant to be. Comply with the orders of police officers. Resisting arrest is a real and dangerous crime.
Nonpartisan liberty for all. I'm your host, Dave Bourne, and it is December 15th, 2015, and I'm coming to you live from Las Vegas, Nevada. I love when they say on there that we just enforce the law, or I can't remember the exact quote, but basically that they're saying they have nothing to do with the fact that there's all these fucked up laws, yet they're the ones lobbying for the laws to stay in place. So they're so full of shit. And they're advisors on them. So they're lobbyists and advisors to county commissions and the state houses and any legislative branch, mayor, whatever. And then they say that, oh, but we don't make the laws. Technically, you don't, but you try to be involved in it as possible, as far as involved in it as you can. So thank you for tuning in. We're on weeknights, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday at 7 o'clock Pacific, 10 o'clock Eastern. We won't be on tomorrow because I have a Christmas party to attend, so that's why I did a show yesterday. And you can listen on Spreaker.com and NonpartisanLibertyForAll.com. We promote the ideas of true freedom and liberty, meaning being able to do whatever you want as long as you respect the freedom of others and don't directly interfere with their freedom, as well as exposing the government for what it is, a mafia based on extortion that rules without consent by threat of force and violence. And I apologize for yesterday's show. We didn't get to totally cover what I wanted to. I had planned on going through the whole topic of labels, and Ellen Ball had joined us for the first hour. So things were going well until I read another comment in a series of, I guess, attacks on me for things that I didn't even actually do. So it's really fucked up that how people can react to things and how other people can just stab you in the back and stuff like that. But I mean, none of these people that are mad or are believing lies from specific people I even know. So it was funny that somebody wrote something like, oh, you're losing all these friends. I'm like, I don't even know you motherfuckers. So no offense, but I don't really care. What I care about is listeners. So that does bother me, that people want to make up lies and put things out there and affect my show, because again, I don't get paid for the show. I've put a lot of money into the show, and I do it obviously to get the information out there to people. You know, I don't do this for my fucking health. I mean, I do enjoy doing the show, but my main goal is to get the information out there to people and to help the people I can get the information out there. So I'm always trying to expand my listener base, and I got claimed of begging people to help me. But I wouldn't call that begging. But yeah, any chance I get for anybody to help up the listenership, I want. Not because, I need it's an ego thing and I need to have a certain amount of listeners like other people. I want to reach as many people as possible. I have ideas. I have things that I think are important that need to get out there that I don't see a lot of people doing. Yes, I see independent shows out there. I don't see anything like mine, and I don't see, as I'll go through these labels, I don't see myself fitting into any of these labels neither. I think that I'm a unique person, as everybody is, though. So I'm not trying to take anything away from anybody else doing a show. There's some good shows out there. There's some people that are getting out some information, and there's some people that have shows that are just having fun. Like I mentioned, the Rebel Love Show, which I don't want to promote too much because they're on the same time as me, but you can listen to their archive on... you can watch it on YouTube. I think they have their own channel, The Rebel Love Show. And that's more of just kind of a laid back, they talk about New Hampshire, fun type of show. So, when you want to relax and listen and hear about New Hampshire and things that are going on, they cover issues sometimes. I mean, that's a show to listen to. And I think Rob does a good job. That rhymes. Rob does a good job. And I don't know Rob that well. I've talked to him on Facebook, but he seems like a nice enough guy from knowing him from watching the show, which I honestly haven't in a while. I did today. I'm like, I haven't watched his show in a while because I've been paying attention more to improving my show and listening back. And then when I can't stand listening to myself anymore, I go to YouTube and research things. So I'll try to find something that's long that I can just play while I'm working and listen to it. And then I'll catch, bits and pieces. Obviously, while I'm working, it's hard I can't focus 100% on it, but I will be able to pick up things here and there that will be helpful to what I'm trying to do. So I've been spending a lot of time doing that as opposed to listening to shows. If I listen to a show, a lot of times I'll listen to Free Talk Live, but it even depends. Sometimes I find myself even turning off Free Talk Live, and I've talked about why before. And I don't want to get into a whole nother thing on that, nor do I want to get into a whole nother thing about what I talked about last night. But that's not what the show is about. And I had a couple shows really in a row. As I had said, the show on Thursday made a lot more sense because really what I was doing was talking about how the people that do shows about freedom and liberty, including myself, most of them need to step it up, that we need to be on a level as the government media that's out there, or maybe not be on the same level, but at least be close to it. So that was my main thing in talking about LRN is there's a lot of shows on there that aren't even close. And LRN is probably the biggest. I mean, they're definitely the self-proclaimed biggest, but they're probably right that they are the most well-known and biggest liberty-oriented network out there. And they do have satellites, so they're heard in other countries, and that's important. And, some of the show selections that are being put on there, not just based on a couple things. One, the quality of the show, but also things that I would say shouldn't be on a Liberty network or aren't really doing a lot, I think, to push those ideas. Now, again, that's my opinion. Ian Freeman of Free Talk Live runs the network, and he has the right to do whatever he wants with it. So that's fine. But I wanted to make a point. Now, there was other motivation behind it, so that's why, in a way, I feel bad about it. But I wanted to make a point that anybody who has a show that promotes the ideas of freedom and liberty or comes into that realm needs to step it up. I mean, not every single person, but I mean, even if you're great, even like I would say Free Talk Live is great, but there's still things they can do. Ernie Hancock, I think, has a great show, but there's still things he can do. Adam Kokesh, I don't know if he's on right now or not, but when he was on, I thought he put on a great professional show, but I'm sure there's still things he can do. So no matter who you are, you can be number one. There's always things that you can do. But I'm saying that there's a big gap, and I've talked about it before, and I'm more trying to motivate people and give criticism, but constructive criticism, really. And I really didn't get into details, so I don't know that I gave a lot of constructive criticism. I just said in general for people to be more dedicated. I know it's hard. Hey, I have a full-time job too, so I totally understand. And I think I would be so much better if I was doing this full-time. So don't get me wrong. I totally understand. I'm in the same situation as a lot of the people out there that are doing shows. So I feel you, and I know how much work it is. I mean, sometimes I'll do 4 hours, and I do the show at least 3 times a week. And I'm not asking for any credit or anything like that. I'm just saying I understand that it's hard enough doing it once a week. So I know. And for me, I'm not as social as other people as well. So people that have bigger social lives or social circles have less time to focus on shows. Whereas, to me, the show comes first. I mean, well, my fiance comes first and then the show. And then as far as, I'd rather be doing a show than out at the bar or something like that. But I'm a little older than a lot of these people as well, even though I say I'm 29. But we'll stick with that because I kind of look like it. So we'll stay with that. But anyway, I have been, it's not about negativity, even though a lot of the things we talk about are negative because that's what's going on. Negative things are going on. But what I mean is me talking about other people or me responding to asinine comments or statements from psychos, basically fucking nut jobs that are sending me messages. And I took that yesterday as kind of the last straw. Like, okay, I've never explained this. I never said anything about it really on air, except kind of in response to some messages, but I didn't mention anybody's name, and it was a very brief response. So I said, all right, I'm going to tell the story of what really happened, not some bullshit that some fucking lying psycho is going to go and tell people. So I should have just ignored it and not even got into it, and I wasted showtime doing it, about an hour. So I wanted to start early today because Ken Schortgen's not going to join us till 8, so that gives me an hour and a half to get into anything that we missed yesterday and then to talk about anything else. And I just want to make it clear to anybody, not just the people that are out there believing stories and talking shit and sending fucked up messages or posts or those type of things, that I'm not going in fucking nowhere. You can try to do whatever you want to get less people to listen to my show, to make people think bad of me so they won't listen to my show, to make up your lies so people won't listen. But I'm not going anywhere. And I'm going to continue to put on the best show that I possibly can. And I'm going to continue to be the best I can be. And nobody's going to stop me from doing that. Now, if people don't want to listen, I can't force people to listen. But I don't have to rely on, most of these people are more minarchist or conservatives anyway, and I don't have to rely just on them for listeners. I have essentially the whole world. I did have some listens from other countries, but it was probably like once or something. They were scrolling through Spreaker, because I do have analytics that show people that listened at other countries, but it was very low. It was like 0.2% of total listens. So that's what I mean. It might have been one show somebody stumbled across and clicked on it, and hey, they might have clicked on it for like 2 minutes and clicked off. But my point being, technically, I have the whole world almost. I know there's some countries that lock down the internet with certain sites. So that's why I say essentially. But I have anyone I can get to in the world, including, of course, never mind just the whole United States, but I can get beyond that as well. And these are ideas that go beyond that. So I don't have to rely on a small group of people in Nevada that call themselves the liberty community, which really don't stand for fucking liberty anyway, most of them. There's a few that actually do, but the majority of them are conservatives that say they're libertarians. So, anybody who has a problem with me based on lies and bullshit, fuck you. Anybody who has a problem with me based on reality, fuck you. I'm not going anywhere. So you can say whatever lies you want. You can try to do your best to... It looked like somebody hacked into one of my accounts, to be honest. But whatever. I changed the password on it. People can try to sabotage me or try to do whatever, but it doesn't make a difference. I'm going to keep going, and I'm going to be the best I can be, and I'm going to continue to improve, and I'm going to continue to try to find good people to be on the show that actually are dedicated to true freedom and liberty, not part conservatism, part whatever. And hopefully, even if it's one or two people that get something out of it, at least I touch somebody. So there's really nothing that's gonna stop me from doing this. So maybe if I had like a bunch of kids, then it might be hard to do the show, but I'd still do it. I just have to cut down to like once a week or something. We'd have to work something out there, maybe on the sorry about that, maybe on the weekend. My whatever that thing's called. I know what it's called too, and I can't even think of it. My pop thingy just rubbed against the mic. So, see, I don't know if I like my pop filter. I have usually my pop filter, I've had it on the side to block from the side, and I know it's really supposed to be over the mic, but I kind of talk a little on the side, so I kind of block it sideways, and that's how I've always been doing it with this mic, which I love this mic. It's a blue, it is one of the Blue Yetis, but it's the one that is both the LXR and the what do you call it? The USB. So, did I say that right? XLR. I think I said LXR. And I had the original Yeti that was just USB, and then I bought this, and it was like $250. But it also can be plugged into 2 channels, and I like the mic a lot. I have other mics that were recommended by somebody I can't stand, but those other mics are pretty good too, and that's what anybody else that comes into the studio ends up using. So yesterday, I was talking about labels, and Ellen Ball, our former co-host, actually, I had asked her last minute. She had an extra hour, so she was on for the first hour of the show, which was great. And we talked a little about some labels. But the focus is labels that have to do really with freedom and liberty, libertarianism, anarchism, things like that. So I want to give a summary yesterday of kind of where I got to. I think I got to voluntarist, and that was it, unfortunately. But we did cover libertarians. And libertarians, of course, as you can see, how that term has been totally twisted around, because I would think, really based on the definition, that libertarians wouldn't believe in government. Anarchists is really distorted as well, but in a couple ways. One is that they want total chaos, which is bullshit. The other is, at least in my experience, most of the anarchists are more leftists and lean more towards socialism, but just socialism not through government. So I've kind of moved away from using that term because, yes, what it means is without rulers. So if you take the actual meaning of the word, yes, I don't believe in having rulers. But when I've talked to people that consider themselves anarchists, they start talking about everything being co-ops and a lot of socialist principles that they believe in. Now, again, they say that they don't want the government involved, that was something they do on their own. But at the same time, they'd want everything to be co-ops. And if you didn't have a co-op, essentially they'd boycott you. So it would be a coercive. And this is the opinion of one person, but I've heard other people call themselves leftist anarchists, and really they want the same thing. They just want to do it on their own without the government. But depending on the person you're talking to, I don't know if they want to force things on people or not, because that's the whole point. Most of the people I've talked to have said no, it was just totally by choice. But if you're boycotting every fucking place that wants to adhere to the free market, it becomes coercive. So that's where, I kind of disagree with that. But the label anarchist itself has been totally used inappropriately, because it's used really to describe total chaos. There was that movie, The Purge, Anarchy, and in that movie, it was about total chaos. It was about the Purge, even the original. It's in the future, and essentially the government gives people 24 hours to go out and do whatever they want to do, meaning that people are so fucked up that they need at least one day, to cleanse their system, because they need to murder people and rob and beat people and things like that, which I think is a bunch of bullshit. But it promotes the idea that, well, they need government to control them, because without government, everything would be crazy. And of course, I don't think that's the case at all. I think we would have some issues initially transitioning things, because I think there's people that are so used to relying on the government for everything, and even relying on the government for how to act and their behavior and all of these things. So you'd have some kind of transition there, but in the end, long term, I think that having a society without rulers, without power, without people that have power over others, that ultimately that would be the best society to have. Now, it wouldn't be perfect. Nothing is perfect. You're not going to have some utopia no matter what you do. It's just not, it's not possible. And maybe it could be possible on an island for a certain amount of time, but then you have kids and they have their own ideas. And so it's not something that I believe is perfect. I do believe this, though, that when a government goes too far, at some point you have to bring them back. And I think things really work in a cycle. And I've talked a little about this before, that you have governments that have a level of freedom, get more and more tyrannical, eventually totally take over until you have to essentially destroy them. And I think at that point is when you go to whatever label you want to use, a totally free society without a government. And then eventually what will happen is people will want to build up a government and the whole thing will start over again, and they'll build up a government. But at some point you have to tear it down again, because it's always going to get too tyrannical. That's always going to happen, because when you give people power over you, it's inevitable. And I also think, as I had said yesterday, that it's a concept of government. It's a definition of government. That government, in its own definition, in my interpretation, or at least in my mind, is that we want to control and take over as much as possible. And our ultimate goal is to control and take over everything and control every aspect of your life. And once you get to that point, you're in a lot of trouble, especially with the technology. Because the difference in the days of Hitler, who of course couldn't have done shit if it wasn't for the support of American businessmen, and I had mentioned this too. You look at World War II or World War I ended, I think, 1918 or 1919, and Germany lost. And then you have 20 years later, not even, you have Hitler attacking other countries. How is that possible? How is it possible that a country can lose a war like World War I and then do what they did afterwards? Well, it's possible from only one viewpoint, is that somebody funded it all. Now, not one person, but people built them up and funded them. Because there's no way. You would think that, you look at Japan after World War II. The country's decimated. And then what did they start doing? I don't remember, and I'm not a expert in the history of Japan. Maybe when Ken comes on, if this comes up, we can ask him about it. But you didn't see, one, Japan going in that direction, but two, I don't remember hearing anything from Japan until they started making electronics in the 80s. I mean, they might have been making them before that, but I'm too young to know. But that's really when I remember hearing anything about Japan years and years later. And of course, nothing to do with any army or armed conflicts, just to do with their business and computers and TVs and electronics. So I've never really heard anybody ask this fucking question. How could, and maybe I'll ask Ken when he's on because he would know more about it, how could a country that was, from what I understand, they were pretty damaged from World War I, come back less than 20 years later, around 20 years, and do what they did? And it's because they had the funding of all these American businesses. And why? These were some of the people that I think wanted to experiment, wanted to, and you have a lot of money and you have power and you have all these things, like, you get bored. It's like, what else is there to do? And then you start playing with governments and start playing with lives and get into things like, I want more power. And how can I have more power and control some of these things? And I want to control what governments do and things along those lines. And just for people who don't know, FDR was, at least in what he said, not in his actions, obviously, but more of an anti-Semite than Hitler was, at least in his words. Because from what I understand, what he had said about the Jews was pretty bad. Maybe it wasn't worse than Hitler. I never read Hitler's book, so I don't know. Now, obviously, what Hitler did was worse because he murdered, I think, 6 million Jews. But FDR didn't give a fuck about the Jews, I'll tell you that. And, some people look at him as such a great president because of the New Deal and all this shit. I look at him as a president who started the United States on another path, which is where they wanted to go, into socialism and into almost the same kind of, Nazism in a way that was brought over after the war. So this is totally off topic, but it is something that is important, that Operation Paperclip, which any listeners who, listen to a lot of shows or just, do research on their own know about Operation Paperclip and how they brought over all these Nazis. I don't know what the number was, but that's why I don't trust, like, a lot of things like medicine and science, some of it, because some of it was brought over from them and then just generally accepted. It's like having the Nazis test something and then it be a generally accepted fact. Like I always use vaccines, that vaccines were tested. I'm not saying they were tested by the Nazis, but doctors themselves don't test vaccines. Your local doctor does not, most likely has never been in a test of vaccines, yet he'll tell you how safe they are because he's basing it off of what he's been taught. So sometimes I think the same about certain things, not necessarily vaccines, but certain other things that were brought over by the Nazis, psychiatry as well. Not that I'm saying that there aren't people that are legitimately mentally ill. I mean, I have a family member and they actually did a big Boston Globe report on them. And I don't think that mental illness doesn't exist. However, I think you could take that DSM book and probably cut, at least 3/4 out of it. Now, again, that's me, somebody on the outside looking in. Now, any therapist would tell you that's bullshit, or maybe they wouldn't. I don't know. Maybe some of them are saying they're adding too many things now. I think something with being anti-government is in there now as a disease. There's a name for it. So anyway, we went through libertarians, anarchists, and the one that I kind of skipped over was, or I think I was talking about, was the liberty community. So you have this word that's used, the liberty community. And I guess these people that are, bad mouthing me or whatever based on the words of one person who got words from another person who's an alcoholic and doesn't know what's going on half of the time anyway. And I should stop that. But they would call themselves part of the liberty community, probably in Las Vegas. So that liberty community I could really do without, even before this had happened, the majority of those people. Not all of them, but a lot of them. But what is the liberty community? And I've even used it before, but I would say I would not consider myself part of the quote unquote Las Vegas liberty community. I do my own thing. I would not say, and again, I've used it before, but I guess what they mean is, people that support liberty that live in a certain geographical area. There's the liberty community, but I don't know how I feel about that, and I don't speak for any of these people. So that's another reason why I don't like labels, is because I don't speak for any of these people, and they don't speak for me neither. So somebody could say something and they'd say, well, say you're a libertarian. Well, this libertarian said this, so what are your feelings on this? Or, none of these people speak for me. None of them. And I don't speak for any of them. I don't really, and again, even before this incident, I don't hang out with any of these people. I may have seen them once or twice. I went to 2 protests years ago, and I went to a couple of parties with quote unquote liberty people from the liberty community. And there's a lot of them that I do not even like. So for somebody to tell me that, no one likes you, well, basically, that's for a reason, because some of them I don't want anything to do with. And that may come off arrogant, and I don't mean to come off that way. Basically, when I'm somewhere, people might take me for arrogant, because usually if I don't know anybody, I was saying this yesterday, if I don't know anybody somewhere, I'm shy. I'm not like I am on the radio, because I don't have a whole bunch of people sitting in front of me watching me. So I know there's people out there that can hear me. And maybe if I hear that a certain person was listening or something like that, like somebody from Sirius Radio was listening, and they may give me a job, because that's probably the only radio network I would work for, because you could say what you want, you can curse, and it's national. So I wouldn't want to be on a regular radio station. I wouldn't want to do the syndication thing, because if I want to say fuck, I want to say fuck. If I want to say whatever I want to say, I don't want somebody else censoring me and controlling what I say. Now, that doesn't mean that wouldn't happen on Sirius, but they also have like 100 and something stations, so I don't know how much they can pay attention to everybody. And I've heard some of the stuff that they've said, which is pretty bad. And I'm saying, like, on the Progressive channel, where they're talking about, they're just lumping all people that are considered anti-government into this whole thing that they're racist and they're Nazis. And I have a clip from it. It was crazy. And actually, I'll play it because it does relate, if I can find it. It does actually relate to what we're talking about, because it has to do with getting, these labels and mixing up these labels and labeling people unfairly. So I'll try to find that. There's a couple, so I don't know if I'll have the right one here. I think I do, though. So maybe we'll play that during the break. But Liberty Community, I don't know. I guess that's the least descriptive and distorted, because you could just say, hey, people that say they believe in liberty. But most liberty communities that I've seen are a lot of conservatives and a lot of people that don't have the same ideas. So I would say the majority of the people in the quote unquote liberty community do not have the same ideas as me at all. Not even close. There's a couple people. I really don't know many people that have the same ideas as me. There's some that are very similar, and I'm talking more in Las Vegas. There's a lot of people in New Hampshire that tend to have similar ideas. There are some in Vegas that I think they do, but I haven't talked enough with them to really know, like, Facebook friends and stuff like that. So, but most of the events I've been to were conservatives, telling people how great conservatives are, even though they're totally hypocritical, just like the progressives, where they, and actually I'll get to this, and that's why I had skipped Liberty Community yesterday, because I wanted to talk about the words and definitions of freedom and liberty along with Liberty Community. So let me actually play this clip. I think I have the right one from Sirius Radio. And when we come back, I'm going to talk about the definitions of freedom and liberty, how I see them, and how they are distorted by the quote-unquote liberty community, and mainly Republicans and conservatives. So we'll be right back after this. NonpartisanLibertyForAll.com. If you'd like to call in, you can call in at 702-470-7664. That's 702-470-7664. And I suggest that you send a text message first and give your name, where you're calling from, and what you want to talk about. Otherwise, you'll probably be waiting a while. And you can Skype into the show as well. Username Nonpartisan Liberty for All. It's all one word. So we'll be right back after this. NonpartisanLibertyForAll.com.
866-997-4748. Tim in Detroit, you're on the Michelangelo Signorelli Show.
Oh, hi, Michelangelo.
And sorry, this is not the best quality, because I think the only way I could record it was to play it and record it that way. I didn't have the recorder that I have now. Now I actually have a great way that I could do it. But I think I played it or something and recorded it that way. I don't know. So the sound's not that good, so I apologize for that. But this is the clip I was talking about, which is insane. If you hopefully you can hear it and understand it, and it's insane.
I've been following the Bundy case a little bit. The problem is that we're not just talking about civil disobedience. It's not that, it's actually sedition. And let me try to illustrate this. In the 1960s, the great civil rights movement was very active throughout the United States, and it went to other countries too. Their objective was obviously to reform, not overthrow the government of the United States.
And just to give some context to this as well, this was right after the Bundy Ranch, but it was before he gave the comments that were considered racist. Now, if you listen to the whole thing from the beginning, you'll see how he's just more of an old man being ignorant and using ignorant words, but there is no hate in him at all. But this was before that even came out. And it's relevant because they start talking about him being a racist and stuff like that. And this is before he had even said those words. So I just wanted to give it some some context there. Thanks.
And their means of trying to do that was nonviolent resistance. People might picket lunch counters, they might do marches, things like that. It was nonviolent. There was no, in fact, the whole philosophy of the civil rights movement was explicitly nonviolent, as stated by Dr. King, who was inspired by people like Gandhi. So now we move to today. And you have to understand that this Mr. Bundy traces his lineage back to these right-wing. They're not really militias either. Look, a militia is something that's formed by a state government or national government. These aren't militias, Michael. They're terrorist bands. Let's call them what they are. If these were Islamic groups doing what they're doing under the U.S. Code of Law, they'd be called terrorist groups. We simply don't call them terrorist groups because they're white. Let's not kid ourselves here. This is why I believe the Obama administration backed down, because it does not want this to be seen as engaged in anti-white violence. I think it's hypocritical. Mr. Bundy is a terrorist. He should be treated according to the laws of terrorism we have.
Well, I get your point, and look, I think the federal government has every right to go in there and take this land, and I'm hoping they will. Do you agree with Donna Brazil's point that, April 19th was the Timothy McVeigh anniversary? It was also the anniversary of Columbine. It has all of this right-wing, it was Hitler's birthday or something. I mean, it has all of this right-wing weight to it, and you want to show that you're not exacerbating the situation. The last thing you want is for them to be able to turn this into something that they can grow bigger because the government looks strong-armed, right? Like it was going too far.
But Mike, they've been with us now for 20 or more years. We've had the survivalists, we're tracing back to the 70s. You've had the KKK. White terrorism has been with us for decades, if not centuries. You've had lynchings, you've had violence. I think we as on the left do ourselves a disservice by not highlighting the terrorist nature of what I call white.
I agree with you completely. And I would say it's right-wing terrorism. That is what it should be called. And they should be... I'm sick of... Look at the guy who just attacked these people and killed these people because he was anti-Semitic. It's right-wing terrorism. And people got mad at using the term right-wing terrorism. These people are all in the same groups. They're anti-government.
We know they took over in fascist Spain. They took over in Nazi Germany. A lot of the Latin American regimes that, by the way, people like Ronald Reagan supported were right-wing. This is a fascist movement. This isn't a bunch of guys who decided to go to a lark, at this guy's ranch. I mean, they have an agenda. They want to create a United States where gay people, black people, disabled people, people of color will be subordinate, if not eliminated. And we have to say that out in the open. These guys are terrorists by any definition. Now you can say, well, what about the philosophical value of fascism versus liberalism? Well, fine, but this is not an academic discussion. If we take terrorism seriously, these guys are terrorists and should be treated as terrorists.
I agree with you. And people run from the idea that it's terrorism. The media runs from it, when it's an anti-abortion attack, when a doctor is killed, when it is a racial minority or a religious minority. We saw what happened at the Sikh temple. We saw what happened with the attack on these people who weren't even Jewish. He believed they were Jewish. We see it every day. with attacks on African Americans. We saw it with the Minutemen at the border, attacking immigrants and killing people. And the media never uses the word terrorism.
You know, Michael, I know you have other callers, but you have to understand a lot of this stuff, too, goes back to corporations. Wherever you have a lot of capitalism, and you can find this even in Weimar Germany, capitalism seems to, in a sense, condone right-wing extremism, and this is why. Capitalism is interested in pretty much making a profit, okay? This forms sort of a class-based society. But in that class-based society, you have groups, obviously, that feel disenfranchised, even if they're not, okay? And briefly, corporations want to create a certain, how can I put this, resentment. I mean, for example, Hitler used this against the Jews, okay? And what he did is he took Germans in the capitalist system who were not doing well, and he scapegoated the Jews. You see this in other societies. You see this, obviously, in the United States, where many whites are not doing well under this system, and therefore are you know, the whites are
we certainly see how politicians then scapegoat other groups and drive these people to these extremist groups, for sure. Listen, thank you for the comments today, Tim. 866.
Promoting the ideas of true freedom and liberty, nonpartisan liberty for all radio with Dave Bourne.
And we are back. That every time I listen to that, it scares me because basically when I would listen to Serious Progressive, and I would listen to it just not because I was a fan of the shows or I'm a progressive, because obviously I'm not. I would listen to it for as long as I could stand it, especially that guy and his fucking annoying voice. But I felt like I was getting the plans of the White House and what Obama and his administration thought and what they wanted to do. And essentially what they talked about was lumping everybody into this box. So take conservatives, take Republicans, take libertarians, take anybody who's considered anti-government in any way and put them in this box and then do what you want with them. Maybe put them in camps or put them in jails or put them on a list or whatever you might want to do with them. And that's scary. And I think that's why progressives, they want to throw libertarians in with conservatives, which I think is totally ridiculous. And part of that is because of Republicans and them calling themselves libertarian leaning and things like that. Whereas I probably would agree with a progressive just as much as I would agree with a conservative. It depends on the issue. Now, I know part of it is because Republicans say they want less government, but that's bullshit. They don't want less government. They want less of their kind of government. They're the fascists and the progressives are the socialists, and that's pretty much what it is. And they want what they want. So it's okay for them to say, well, we want government out of our lives, unless it has to do with drugs, then we want government in our lives. Or if it has to do with, what they pay for, well, we don't want to pay for any of this stuff unless it's the huge budget of the military. Or we don't want people to have freedom, except we want to spy on everybody and we want to have lists of Muslims. And that kind of, not the list, but the spying part kind of went over on both parties. So that essentially crossed over there. But it's just it's ridiculous. They're just two sides of the same coin. We all know that. And I don't even really follow the elections. Whatever I hear in the morning driving, that's about what I hear about who's running for office, and especially with the office of the president, because I know that, one, it doesn't matter who's in there, and only somebody that can be controlled by the quote-unquote powers that be is what I call them. Because I don't know who the powers that be are. It could be corporations. It could be lobbyists. It could be the so-called Illuminati or billionaires or whatever. There's a lot of sources, I think, that go into that secretly run the country. But it's definitely not the people that get elected. So you might have one or two people that somehow, like you got a Ron Paul in there somehow. But, I mean, he was in the House of Representatives. He was one person out of 435. Really, what does that matter? Rand Paul, if you believe that he's really a libertarian, he's still one person out of 100 in the Senate. So, and altogether, you have 535 people in Congress. I mean, really, how much difference can one person make? And I don't seem to think it's a lot anyway. Even as president, there's only so many things you can do. Now, they're trying to give the president more power so he can act like a dictator with this presidential, what do you call them? The executive orders, which shouldn't even exist. They justify the executive orders by some clause in the Constitution that points for the general welfare. It's crazy. So essentially, they can do whatever they want. Not only can they do whatever they want, but they can justify it and base it off of something that's there. And that's why they write the laws the way they do. It's a business. It goes around in circles. It's a business of laws, from lawyers to politicians to judges. We want laws that we can interpret any way we want. We don't want clear laws, even though they could write them that way if they wanted to, because we want this big business of lawyers and judges and all of this shit. And when I talk about stuff like that, it really fucking does piss me off, because so many people have gotten screwed over by the system. I've got screwed over by the system, but on a much minor level compared to you have somebody now who I'm going to have on the show, and I'm going to write an article about it, who's facing 20 years because her son broke his leg. And of course, at the time, they weren't people that thought about, the police, not being able to trust the police or the CPS. So they just cooperated and told them everything. They didn't realize that everything you tell them, they're going to twist and use against you. So, of course, now they know, and that's what happens. You have this just regular American family, and you think that there's justice in the U.S. and that you can trust the police and you can trust the government, and the government's out there for your best interest. And they would never do something like blow up a building with 3,000 people in it, or be involved in a shooting of a bunch of people. But then you see how fucked up the government is and what the government is really about, and realize the agenda of the government is one main thing. It's to expand the government. And in expanding the government, obviously, if you expand something, you need to get into different areas. It's just like expanding a business. Well, we sell computers, but we want to get into the software industry as well. And we want to get into the cable industry. And we want to get into this or that. It's the same type of thing with government, except it's a lot more serious and it affects your life because they want to get into this part of your life or that part of your life or this part of your business or that part of your business. And it's really to grow government as much as you can and control as much as you can till you get to a point. I don't know that you can ever even get to this point because there's constantly new things, but get to the point where you control every aspect of everything, everybody's life, everything that happens is controlled by the government and the bureaucrats. Well, the bureaucrats are the ones with the power, of course. They tell the mindless followers that hold the guns for them. But that's where all governments go eventually. And if they don't, it's because they get stopped before they get to that point. And if you look at it, most governments are going in that direction or have been there before and got overthrown. So, you look at Europe, I mean, they're like the United States, except they're further ahead with taking more control. Although Europe has been around a lot longer, but they also went through kings and, all that shit too, where they essentially had dictators. And the U.S., which hasn't been around as long, didn't go through that. Well, I guess they went through a king before they became the United States. So back to the terms of freedom and liberty. And these are highly distorted by, I would say, the conservatives. Republicans, conservatives, whatever you want to call them. They're constantly talking about freedom and liberty and how they support it. They're the party that supports freedom and liberty. But it's based on their terms. So it's like they determine, or it's like they make their own definition of freedom. And I'd like to see their definition because it's not what real freedom is. Because one, under their definition of freedom, you don't own your own body. The government does. Otherwise, you'd be able to do drugs and, any other thing you want to do to your body. But you can't do drugs. Well, you can, but if you get caught with them, they will put you in a cage and kidnap you. And that's why I think all police are bad, because all police will grab people off the street, kidnap them for something that you have a right as a human to do. As a human being, some people will say it's a God-given right, however you consider it. But you have a right to put what you want in your own body, whether it's good for you or not. Now, I'm not suggesting you do it. I'm just saying that you have the right to do it. And it's none of the government's fucking business. And liberty, to me, freedom and liberty go along together. That I don't know how, I had definitions. I didn't actually go and look them up again this time, but to me, freedom and liberty go together. It's the whole package of being able to live your life how you want to live it. So I think that when you have a political party that preaches about freedom and liberty, who wants to control various aspects of your life, they want to take money from you without your consent. They want to force you to do certain things without your consent. They want to use your money to go and murder people. And it doesn't just apply. I know under different governments, of course, there's different laws and things like that. But what about the freedom and liberty of innocent people in other countries that are getting killed all the time? Because it doesn't seem like they have any. That a life in another country means nothing compared to a life in the U.S. Now, I guess I understand the U.S. government claims that they have to protect their own citizens first. And if you want to say like a family, you'd protect your own children first over other kids. But that doesn't mean that you want the other kids to die. So it's kind of like that. And I'm not saying that the government necessarily wants kids to die. However, that is the result of what they're doing by dropping bombs in all of these places that have a big population of civilians. But it's funny how that's done, and they don't want to do that in Syria. And the reason they don't want to do that in Syria is because they have their own army, they being the U.S. government, ISIS over there, and they don't want to take out their own army. So they're like, hey, we're not going to bomb over there because we don't want to hit any innocent civilians. Yeah, you don't want to hit your own fucking army. That's why. So those are two words that I think are just totally distorted. And that's part of the reason for the name of the show. And when I first came up with my page was back when I was not part of any parties. I've never been part of any parties, but saw more of it from people. So I wanted to make sure that people were clear that when I say freedom and liberty, I'm not a fucking conservative. I'm not a Republican. I'm somebody who believes in what I call true freedom and liberty. And that is not what these people believe in. So I have about 20 minutes before Ken joins us, and I wanted to talk just a little about, and this is in general, yes, it is kind of based a little on things that have happened recently, but I've always known this anyway, and this is why I never really trust anybody, and that's why really when I look at the damage is minimal, because when you don't trust people, you know, like these people don't know anything really about me anyway. Not that there's anything bad to know, but the less you obviously trust people, the less, one, they can hurt you. Because if you trust somebody and become friends with them and you actually care about them and then they screw you over, then it's like, it's upsetting. It's like, oh, I cared about that person. So that part I really don't give a fuck about. But it's sad in a way because you want to be able to have friends that you care about. But in this day and age especially, you have even there was a post about Facebook, how some of your Facebook friends, really are undercover police or undercover agents. I did a story. Well, I didn't write the story, but I talked about a story where a woman was dating a guy for 6 years, and she found out that he was a cop spying on her and her friends who were part of some environmentalist group for 6 years. I guess she kind of figured it out by the end. But that's crazy. I don't know really how much of them are out there. And I think that's the future of a lot of jobs. And I really think that. I think the future of a lot of jobs are government jobs. So, of course, more fucking taxes. Because they're going to have more people that are spying. Now, these people might have to have regular jobs as well. So they just live in the neighborhood. They have a regular job that they go to. Or maybe not, because then they can, they have more time to be around the spy. Maybe they're on, they say they're on disability, or they're retired, or they came into a lot of money, whatever, if that ever comes up. But you have this kind of anyway. You have to see something, say something, where actually people buy into this shit. That I'm assuming, I guess I could even be wrong, that like the people that called on the parents that let their kids go to the park by themselves or something, that the people that call on them, I'm assuming that they're not government agents. But who the fuck knows? Who knows that you don't have a government agent in your neighborhood or on your Facebook page or watching your computer? Because they do have these fusion centers. There's another name for them that I can't remember, but where it's the DHS, the FBI, and the local police all share information in these fusion centers. And I actually knew somebody at work whose husband worked at one. And I don't know what they do all day. They have two in Las Vegas, one in the Reno area, and then one, or did I say Las Vegas? I meant Nevada, and one here in Las Vegas. So I would think that, because the way she made it sound is, there's all this stuff that goes on all the time. So they must be stopping so many terror plots because, there haven't been any in Las Vegas. So I guess every day they're stopping a terror plot, which is bullshit. They're sitting around looking at naked pictures that you've taken that you have saved on your computer. I mean, really, what are they doing all day? They have 70-something around the country. So this bullshit that they're, one, even needed in the first place, they were created after 9/11, and two, that they're not in your computer or they're not watching you or they're not listening to your phone calls if you're somebody who would be considered part of, if I'm going back to one of those words, liberty movement. They might be, because what the fuck else do they got to do? So that's why I had mentioned they may be listening to my show. I don't know. What else do they got to do? So if they don't have shit to do, then they may say, "Hey, well, we gotta spy on this guy. Let's track him. Let's get some information." Maybe not. I don't know. I don't know how big their staff is. I'm thinking it's big, but I don't know. So That's what the Fusion Center, or shit, I forget the other name. And the first time I ever heard them mentioned on TV was during the Boston bombing. Before that, I had known about them just from, I think from Alex Jones or something. But I had never heard them mentioned on government media because most people don't know they exist and they want to keep it that way. But the chief of police in Boston mentioned his Fusion Center. I think they're actually called like the counter-terrorism centers, or I don't know. But they're also called fusion centers because it's a, fusion of local police, FBI, and DHS working together. So, 3 useless fucking agencies. So I'm going to take a break and play a couple of clips. Probably when we come back, Ken should be with us by then. And if not, he'll be with us a little while after. And we'll talk all about what's going on in the world of geopolitics and the economy. I know everybody's excited. Actually, Ken, to me, is really entertaining. I love when he comes on. He's not, you think geopolitics and the economy, like, man, that's just going to be fucking boring. It's not at all. Ken does a great job of making it entertaining the way he presents it. So we will be back after this. NonpartisanLibertyForAll.com. Again, you can call in 702-470-7664 or Skype Nonpartisan Liberty for All. We'll be right back.
I was named on LibertyViral.com one of the top 20 hottest libertarian women. And, of course, this got some
I'm a libertarian because I fucking love roads. Roads are awesome. They are actually one of the best ways to get from point A to point B, and yet
A few weeks ago, my father and I set out on a big adventure. An adventure to find out our heritage. Well, what we found out was, from my grandmother's side, we go all the way back to England. And from my father's side, we go all the way back to Ireland. England and Ireland. I was thinking about between 1892 and 1954, millions of people immigrated into the United States. When they entered our harbor for the first time, this is probably what they saw, the Statue of Liberty. The actual name for the Statue of Liberty is Liberty to Enlighten the World. Liberty means freedom, a freedom to enlighten the world. Freedom from what? It's actually freedom from something they call tyranny. Tyranny comes from the word tyrant. It basically means a government without constraint. People moved to America for that freedom. A freedom to develop their own laws and have some controls. Actually, the Statue of Liberty, the tablet she holds, is the law. When people immigrated into the United States, I started thinking, what was it like to arrive into a new country? To find new work, a new home? At the bottom of the Statue of Liberty, there's broken chains. Chains that symbolize the freedom from a tyrant. I started thinking about what Galatians 5 says. How it talks about we are free in Christ. We are free from bondage, from those chains.
We are here with
Marina and Kelly.
And I would just like to ask you guys, what is your personal definition of freedom?
It's a difficult question. I think it's like, it's the...
where I can walk around and do as I please if it does not constrain, if it doesn't go against anybody's personal agency or ability to live.
Okay, freedom, it has many components. Like, for instance, it has freedom of speech, freedom of the liberty to go in everywhere that you want, freedom to select your job and do whatever you want, respecting others people. That's, in general, my concept of freedom.
Be able to do what is right for you within the framework of society.
It's the right of make decisions and choose the way, which way do you want to live your life, I think. And that's it for me.
For me, it's to be able to do everything that you want, to be spontaneous. Freedom is that you can choose your way, the way you want to do the things.
Do you think freedom exists here in America?
I think so, yeah. Well, it exists in America. I think it's like a personal, it's difficult to explain because it's not the country doesn't take you out the freedom or not. It's like the freedom goes in the person, and I think so. I think that it's a really
I think so.
Open country.
Did you guys ever hear of the NDAA?
No.
What it is, it's an act where if you speak out against the government or if they can, the government can label you a terrorist of any kind, they can put you away indefinitely. Did you guys ever hear about that?
No.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
My personal definition of freedom...
On a national scale.
Yeah. I would say probably the practical application of the golden rule.
And that would be?
Well, just treat others as you like to be treated. Yeah, I thought it'd be fun to make a candy outfit and be a street performer.
Okay, where were you the morning of 9/11?
I was at the doctor's office in Minneapolis, Minnesota.
Okay, did you make the costume yourself?
Yeah.
Okay. And is it out of real candy or is it?
Yeah. We've got about 2 gallons of Nerds on.
Okay, what kind of candy is it?
Nerds.
What do you think about the drone program, the unmanned drones, bombing over Pakistan and Yemen and elsewhere?
I don't know. From what I've read, it's not really winning us big fans over there. And winning the people is essential in modern day warfare, winning over the people is pretty essential. And so I think it could be good, but I think that right now it's very much counterproductive.
Okay, and where do you stand on the issue of whether or not to subsidize birth control?
Oh, absolutely.
3 answers.
Okay.
Is it a democracy, an oligarchy, or a republic? Founded as?
I guess I haven't taken a government class recently, but...
What's up, B?
Isn't it technically sort of a republic? I forget.
On paper, it's a republic, but...
I would say that we're unfortunately a little bit somewhere in between because of the lack of campaign finance reform and the ability for corporations to essentially donate as much as they please. It's moved a little bit, unfortunately, towards oligarchy, as witnessed in the extreme disparity of income that we haven't seen since the 1920s. So I'd say it still is a democracy, but it has an unfortunate amount of oligarch influence.
We don't have any regulation at the Federal Reserve, for example. Are you familiar with the Federal Reserve System?
Yeah.
In what? You expand?
It's an unelected body that makes pretty important decisions about loaning.
Candyman, thank you very much. Keep fighting the good fight, and yeah.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Certain polls have shown that roughly 10% of the American population self-identifies as libertarian. When asked more specific questions, such as if one is physically
And dying in your beds many years from now, would you be willing to trade all the days from this day to that for one chance, just one chance, to come back here and tell our enemies that they...
Darren, welcome to the show.
Howdy, Adam. How you doing?
Excellent. What's on your mind today?
Well, I follow a little bit of Facebook here and there. I try to stay off of it if I could, but I just can't seem to do it. But
It's a dangerous drug, isn't it?
Tell me about it. Goodness, I noticed you've avoided it pretty well, though. However, I've just noticed that with the different pages that I follow, that there's so much infighting, and my question to you was, what do you think are the basic tenets that we should have to establish in order to avoid all this bickering? I mean, obviously we can have disagreements, but what should be the basis? I guess like the platform that we should say we all agree on this, and the rest we can open for discussion.
Sure.
In your opinion.
Well, I'm pretty clear about this for myself, although I want to point out, and I think you kind of alluded to this, there's good drama and there's bad drama. There are healthy disagreements, debates, discussions, but then the question is, what is productive, what is unproductive? And I think what's most unproductive is bickering on Facebook. You want to write a post attacking someone for their ideas or for their actions? Great. You want to make a video about it? You want to produce some well thought out media? You want to tear me down? Go for it. Do it. But really, don't waste your time making snide comments on my Facebook page, or having a back and forth with someone who's probably a bot or a spammer, someone who's part of a DARPA sock puppet program. Like, really, that's bad drama. It's the waste of time. It's not, is it mean-spirited? Yeah, there's some mean-spirited stuff, but really, that's not what we're talking about. The most mean-spirited stuff is in those offhand comments anyway. So I think that it's not just healthy debate, but that there is good inherent drama that should be embraced and celebrated. We shouldn't be afraid of turning to conflict and flashy disagreements and having those debates and getting into that. In fact, that's kind of how we get to a better understanding of what is libertarianism. And for me, it's pretty clear. If libertarian means you believe in freedom, well, what is freedom? Freedom is the ability to exercise your rights without forceful interference. That is fundamentally incompatible with government, because government is, by definition, the people who are in control. And it's control by force, which is what makes government unique as government, as opposed to a corporation or a charity or a company or a community group or a religious organization. Government is unique because it uses violence to control people. So if you believe in some form of government and it's not, well, I have this crazy vision where I'm applying the word government to something else and I'm imposing my own definition of government and freedom are fundamentally incompatible. So if you're a libertarian and you believe in government, it means that you don't understand what libertarian means. You don't understand freedom. That's the simple understanding. And you might think, Adam, that's a litmus test. You're taking the strictest definition of libertarianism and saying you have to agree with this to be a libertarian. Yeah, I am, because words have meanings. If libertarian means belief in freedom, you believe in freedom, then you have to understand what that means, and that's really important. And I can tell you why from personal experience that not understanding that is really destructive. I called myself a libertarian in high school, and I didn't know what it meant. And no one came and corrected me. No one was like, hey, Adam, no, that's not how it works. No, Adam, you call yourself a libertarian, and that's good. That's the first step. But the next step is understanding it, right? And if someone had told me that, I wouldn't have joined the Marines. I would not have volunteered to deploy to Iraq, and I would not have tortured people. And I would not have been helping people that were paid killers for government. I would not have been a paid killer for government myself. And it's because it is a universal moral principle of non-aggression, of non-violence, of respect for self-ownership that is behind that philosophy of freedom. So it's not that that's going to stop the bickering. I think we should say, hey, Bill Maher, Glenn Beck, you want to call yourself libertarian? Great. Now I'm going to talk shit about you because you've also revealed that you're an idiot. And that's okay. And that's good drama. That's good movement drama, right? As opposed to, oh, I didn't like your Facebook post. So, Darren, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I just wanted to, just talk a little bit more about that. I know we talk a lot about the non-aggression principle and that being, a major portion of libertarianism altogether.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I think free markets is kind of one of those things that's pretty well established as something that all libertarians want, as far as that goes. One of the seemingly kind of like points of contention sometimes is if, between basically whether we go with total anarchy or minarchist type frame. Obviously, you go more towards anarchy. But for those that are more
hold
minarchist,
on. Again, minarchist. That's what I was in high school. I didn't.
Yeah.
I called myself a libertarian, and I did not have any moral principles. That's a problem.
Right.
Minarchism is a poisonous, cancerous leech on libertarianism.
Yeah, and I can understand that thought. My thinking though is that as far as establishing, like where do we go from where we are right now, which is obviously a bad place. How do we get to where we want to be, which is essentially no government at all,
no violence. Right.
And through that, but obviously there's a lot of people that still believe that there has to be some form of government. I mean, I've heard it stated, I can't remember who the quote was, that if you put a bunch of people on an island, the first thing they're going to do is elect a government.
If they're violent people that can't figure out a better way to cooperate, yeah, then that's what they're going to do. But people are evolving, people are learning, people are, thanks to technology, empowered to understand these ideas like never before. And I think that among libertarians, this is one place where I really do have a unique message and a unique solution, because a lot of libertarians say, okay, here's where we are today in our violent society. Here's what we want in our nonviolent society. Well, government's going to collapse. It's unsustainable. Let's hope that it spares us in its violent death throes and, that we survive and we're able to pick up the pieces afterward. I say, hell no, that is not the answer. You have to take charge, take the bull by the horns, face up to the problems that we're, subject to now as a society, as victims of the American government in particular. But this is a global phenomenon. We are not that unique here, except being like, the most violent, aggressive government in the world today, not historically, but today, right? So if that's the case, we know that this is unsustainable. Localization is what's going to happen anyway. Governments are going to fall apart. If you look at this government and you say, this is unsustainable, well, what's going to happen? Is there going to be a collapse? If that's the case, localization is going to be the result. The federal government collapses, state governments still exist, the institutions are still there, the mechanisms of control are still there. And I believe that this is inevitable. I know that this is inevitable. I see the patterns in human evolution, in social development. I know that it is our destiny to achieve a free, voluntary, nonviolent society. It's simply a matter of how we get from here to there. And we as individuals don't get to decide how, whether or not this force of nature is going to play out this way. It's going to happen. And the question that we get to ask ourselves is how, and how smooth can we make this? And if you embrace localization deliberately, this is where I think I'm bringing a unique intellectual contribution to the movement, to the conversation. You deliberately take governments apart from the top down. This is why I'm running for president in 2020 on the platform of an orderly, peaceful dissolution of the United States federal government. But it really doesn't matter if I get elected or not, except in terms of how smooth is this going to be? How peaceful is this going to be? As opposed to if we ignore these problems and we, go to the violent train wreck that a lot of people legitimately see coming. And I do think that's a very real, scary possibility. But it's not, and then we're going to have 100 years of darkness and tyranny will reign on earth forever. No, bullshit. Sorry, I'm not going to do that kind of fear-mongering. And I refuse to accept the irrational premise that, as a force of nature, humanity could go in one direction or the total opposite direction. And I'm not trying to deny that nukes are a real threat and mutual annihilation and all that is a real threat. But this is not going to happen or not because you decided to pick up a pitchfork or you decided to vote for a certain politician. This is the destiny of the species.
So I was really excited to have the opportunity to vote.
You are listening to Nonpartisan Liberty for All Radio with your host, Dave Bourne. Call in at 702-470-7664 or Skype in, username Nonpartisan Liberty for All.
And we are back. That last bit was from Adam Kokesh. I know I kind of went around there for a minute. I was trying to find a specific clip that I wanted to play, and I finally found it, so that was good. But now we have Ken Schortgen with us, live from somewhere in the Phoenix area, I believe. Ken, are you there? Ken?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me? We had this fucking issue last time, too, where there was an issue where the person on Skype can't hear me.
I can hear you. Well, I can't hear you.
Can you hear me? Oh, let me turn this down. Can you hear me now? Ken? Fucking Skype, man. I think it had something to do with the update. So let me try calling again.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
So I have to remember how we fixed this the fucking last time. Well, I do remember how we fixed this. Can you hear me now? Because this is how we fixed this the last time as I turned these up.
I can't hear you. Can you hear me, Dave?
Okay. Let me see.
I can't hear you, so might be something on your end, per se.
There was just for the audience, there was...
What I'll do is I'll see if I can run the show in the background and see if it doesn't echo.
Yeah, there was a fucking update of Skype, and I had the same issue a couple nights ago, and then I turned something up, and then after I turned it up, it was okay. So, how about... Fuck.
Now I can hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you. It's a little bit staticky, but I can hear you.
Okay. Well, how about now? Is that any better?
No, you got a static and...
Wait, let me turn those down. Is any better now?
I can hear you, but it's almost like speaking with a buzz. Almost like, like you've got a microphone or speaker that's just not plugged in all the way.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
That's
any better?
worse.
That's worse? All right, let me turn this down. Yeah, I don't know what it is. I'm going to have to check it out this weekend. I had the same issue, and I was able to correct it, but it's not going to come through on the broadcast. Okay. You'll sound fine, but it's just a matter of you being able to hear me and deal with it and not have it so bad that, I don't want you to be sitting there and it's that bad that it's, bothering you that much. So, I mean, is it okay for,
Yeah, it's
for
fine.
you to deal with?
I can understand you, so I'll just ask you to repeat if something gets garbled.
Let me try one more thing. Does this sound any better or worse? I know there's like static.
A touch worse.
Yeah, that's the static in the fucking thing. So let me turn that off. Okay, yeah, I got to figure out. Something happened. There were two things that had happened. Is one, they upgraded, I guess it's an upgrade, to Spreaker. And when they did that, it fucked up some of my shit. Like my phone got fucked up. And also Skype got fucked up. So, actually, you know what? This might help too. Did that help any? Because I have it on two different lines, and I didn't...
No, that's a little bit worse than what it just was before you switched it.
All right, how about this? Wait, fuck. Those I should be able to turn all the way down.
That's far worse. I just leave it where it is now.
What about now?
Oh, much worse.
Is it? Fuck. Okay. Is it loud? Is that what it is? What's?
No, it's when you talk, it's like a reverberation on your voice. It just I can't really explain it. I'm not really into
Yeah. No, I understand.
So
what about now?
That's pretty good.
Is that better?
Now it's clear.
Okay. I think we got what it was, but now if somebody were to call, I don't think I'd be able to hear them on that. So it's like one or the other. I said it so I was fucking around with making it okay for people to call in through the phone, but then that probably changed that. So, but you're saying now it's fine for you. You're able to hear me how you normally hear me.
Yeah, that reverberation's gone.
Okay, well that's good. At least we got that. So yeah, I got to test a bunch of things this weekend and get it where both the phone and Skype can come through okay. So I apologize for that. I don't know what the fuck happened. My settings are always left the same, and between an update to Skype, because it probably updated yours too, as well as everybody's. And then the new thing with Spreaker, it may be more with the Skype thing though, but with the new Spreaker studio that you have to use their new studio now and can't use the old one. I don't know if that's affecting anything, but it seems like it is. But anyway, I wanted to ask you a question real quick before we get into anything. I don't know if you were listening to earlier in the show, but I had mentioned World War I to World War II, and how in about 20 years the Germans were able to rebuild to be able to do what they did. And of course, one of the reasons that I'm aware of that I think, and I know you have more information than me, and this is why I'm asking you, but was all the American corporations that sunk all this money into Germany, who basically built up Hitler. Was there any other reasons why? And after World War I, how decimated was Germany?
Well, Germany wasn't decimated per se. The war ended before the Allies even set foot into Germany.
Okay.
Yeah, they kicked them out of France. They kicked them most of the way out of Belgium, but then there was the armistice, and Germany never got touched. So the German infrastructure, the German land, the cities, and that, they were all intact. But one of the things that you were just asking about, yeah, the U.S. corporations and the banks did have a great deal to do with it, but that wasn't the primary thing. The primary
But they
thing
must have been broke, though, right? I would assume
they were
after the
broke.
war, they were, even whether they got touched or not, that Germany itself was broke.
Well, you've heard it. You've probably heard of the Weimar Republic.
No.
The Weimar Republic is famous. It's so famous that it's become an adjective, not just a noun. If a nation goes into hyperinflation, then they refer to them as Weimar. Going Weimar. What ended up happening? I'll give the background to this. After the end of the war, Germany was in economic dire straits. They were broke. They had food riots. And had the war not ended, there might have been a revolution. But they were able to, the armistice came before that. France, of course, owed a ton of money to Britain, and Britain owed a ton of money to the United States. And they knew that if they didn't somehow blame Germany for the war, then there would be no restitution. So under the Versailles Treaty, ending World War I, they put the blame on Germany, which then gave them sort of legal ramification to then impose restitution. And what they demanded from Germany was so great that it pretty much bankrupted the entire economy for the 1920s. The 1920s in Europe, because of the devastation in France, Belgium, Italy, Austria-Hungary, and not necessarily Britain, but Britain did feel it. The whole continent was in a recession, probably a depression. And of course, Germany, because they were paying so much to France for the war, they could never get their system out. So what ended up happening is, after the fall, or the Kaiser left in 1918, the Weimar Republic came into being. But the Weimar Republic had no economic background, so they were pretty corrupt, and they figured the only thing they could do to start paying on this war debt is to print money. So they started printing money, created hyperinflation. You see the old pictures of the wheelbarrows with trillions of Deutschmarks just to buy a loaf of bread. And it was because of this that really allowed a person like Hitler to take power, because the people were so desperate they were willing to accept anything. So all you need is a strong man with a promise. And when Hitler came in, because the rest of Europe was in depression, and they had lost an entire generation of people because of the war, when Hitler started moving in, retaking the Rhineland, retaking the Sudetenland, the industrial part, they defaulted on their debts under the Versailles Treaty, and the League of Nations, Britain, and France did nothing. And because they did nothing, then the default stood, and Germany started printing its own money.
So their debt got wiped out, essentially.
Exactly. It was a bluff. It was a dare, and France and Britain weren't strong enough or willful enough to challenge them on it, so it went away.
So, but how much did the money that all of these I wouldn't even call them corporations. I guess they were, but that was back when you actually had the owner really running the corporation, like the Granddaddy Bush and the Rockefellers and J.P. Morgan. Yeah,
Morgan. It's actually Prescott Bush.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I call him Granddaddy Bush, but that's the grandfather of George W. Right. So how much did that have an effect compared to, if they didn't put that, because I was under the impression that if they, collectively didn't put all that money into Germany, that they would have had a pretty hard time attacking all these fucking countries.
Oh, no. The thing about it is most of the money that was given by the banks went towards propping up the Nazi Party. And then once the Nazi Party got into power, then they used fascism, National Socialism, to then rebuild the country. So, yeah, even after the time of Hitler got into power, the banks, but you got to remember, too, in the early 1930s, Prescott Bush and a number of others were actually put up before Congress for in the courts for treason, and there was a lot of indictments. So at that time, they started pulling the money out, and they said, we're not going to deal with it. But their money helped build the Nazi Party so that it could take power. But once it took power, then it pretty much ran on its own. Because the premise is, according to Jim Marrs and others, and I don't know if you're familiar with the writer Jim Marrs, who wrote the one of the books that JFK, the movie, was based on, and he just wrote a new book about depopulation. And I'm starting to read that, and I've read his book, The Fourth Reich. I don't know if you read that, but it really goes into how essentially what they did was they never wiped out Nazism. They never wiped out National Socialism. They just wiped out the German army and Hitler. Well, most of it. Then they brought some of them over here. But National Socialism, their whole plan from the beginning, never went away, and they just imported it into countries like the U.S. to
implemented on a long-term basis, and we're seeing the effects of that now. I mean, would you agree with that assessment, or what are your thoughts on that?
The United States changed after World War II. A lot of the agencies that were created were created with the help of the Nazi scientists and intelligence corps that came over in Operation Paperclip.
Right.
Okay. NASA came over with Goddard and the space program, the rocketry. Then, of course, you had the CIA. The model of the CIA was built upon the old intelligence service of the Nazis. And there were
they also had like the SSO or something before the CIA. There was some. It wasn't.
It was OSS. It was the Office of Special Services.
Yeah, but it wasn't. It didn't. It wasn't even close to the CIA as far as it went. But that was supposedly the U.S.'s CIA before that. But the other thing, and I think I may have talked about this with you. I'm not sure, but it seemed like they already had a plan in place before the CIA was even put together, because you have right away they started infiltrating TV stations. They had
they infiltrated TV stations because most people don't realize this. Nazi Germany had invented the TV in the 1930s, and they had put TVs in a lot of houses in Germany because they realized that if you broadcast things at certain frequencies, then you could control the people. So the concept of programming through television was actually done in the 1930s, not just the 40s and 50s when we think television hit the mainstream. They had it in Germany long before it came to here.
Right. And I think you had mentioned that before, but and also with even MK Ultra was done in the 50s. My point being is that they were the official year the CIA started was 1947.
Right.
And
but see,
all of a sudden they had, not sorry to interrupt, but all of a sudden, right away they had all these things, all these major projects that they got into almost immediately. Like they had an agenda already put together.
Well, there were a number of different things. The 1947 Defense Act changed a lot. Prior to 1947, what we know today as the Department of Defense was actually called the War
Department
Office.
of War.
Right.
Yeah.
And they changed the nomenclature to be Department of Defense, except if you really look at it, we did more war under the Defense Department than we ever did under the War Department.
Right.
Then, of course, the CIA was created out of the OSS. The Air Force was broken apart from the Army Air Corps to create 4 different things, and then there was a number of other different establishments that were put under. Now, one of the important things that most people don't realize is there are 2 brothers, John Foster Dulles.
I know you were going to say
Dulles.
the Dulles brothers. Yeah.
Yeah, they were involved with Harriman, and I can't remember the other name with the law firm. They were part of a law firm called Harriman and something in the 1930s. They worked directly with the Nazis. And as a matter of fact,
and they were
John Foster Dulles went to Eisenhower after the war and asked Eisenhower, who was general at the time, if he could bring a bunch of Nazi scientists and Nazi intelligence people over before the Soviets got them. So Eisenhower was involved.
Well, he also was, wasn't he not chief of staff, but one of the joint chiefs under Kennedy, or he was in some position under Kennedy, one of them.
Oh, yeah, well, National Security Advisor, one was...
and I think he fired him.
Yeah, and here's the interesting thing, is I think it was Allen Dulles was the one under Kennedy, and Kennedy fired him, but when the Warren Commission was created to look at the JFK assassination, guess who they put on the Warren Commission?
Yeah, he was on it. I had known that as well from the movie.
He was making sure that if he had involvement or the CIA had involvement, or
which he did, because they were mad about Kennedy getting rid of them, and there's so many things that, again, these people that talk about, well, ever since Obama or ever since George Bush, or that they don't realize that things have been going on since, the Constitution started. I always bring up the Whiskey Rebellion. I mean, since the country started, there have been things going on, and there's so many things you can name. It's just that it was harder to find information on it before the internet. Now you can find the declassified documents easily by going to certain websites. There's the declassified document. There was one, I don't know if I had mentioned this to you, I did a show on the CIA and a lot of the things that they were doing, in the 50s that have been declassified. And one of them was they did the assassin thing where they were brainwashing college girls to be assassins. I'm sure it's, how it goes even today, like take up a place in this experiment and we'll pay you, $100 or whatever. And college kids always need money. So I'm sure it was something like that. And they had one of the girls they had her pull a gun and shoot at another girl. But the fucked up part is you had one of the CIA agents was fucking all of the girls when they were hypnotized. They were hypnotized into believing they were the wives of this CIA agent. And there's a declassified document where he comes clean and admits all of this shit. And I don't think anything ever happened to him.
Well, probably not. But here's something else. There's an interview out there. If anybody wants to search, they can look Hagman and Hagman, and then do the search with Ricky Ray.
I'm not a big fan of theirs, but
no, that's fine. I'm more interested in the guests than I am in the show. But Ricky Ray doesn't do interviews very often, and he came out and did an interview maybe about 2-3 years ago with Hagman's. This guy used to be inside most of the secret societies. As a matter of fact, he was a member of the Thule Society, and of course, the Thule goes directly back to Nazi Germany and the religion behind the Thules. So, what he said was one of the reasons why Nazi Germany and Hitler was allowed to get away with what they were doing is because most of Europe was under a lot of scrutiny. But Germany, of course, was pretty locked down after the war and segregated. The European elites wanted Germany to pursue all this occultism and these black arts and all this technology and all this mysticism that had they been doing it, they would have had to answer to the people, to the government, to somebody. But the Germans did not during that time. So they allowed them to do this for about, a decade and a half, and that's where they started, creating all this technology. You had the V1 rocket, the rocketry that was far beyond anything the West had. You had a lot of the occultism when it came to mind control and things like that. So once they had mastered a lot of that, that's when primarily World War II kicked into high gear, because then it was time to destroy them so that they could then take all of this knowledge that had been gleaned, and nobody could accuse them of actually going into the, to the darkness trying to create it. They just sucked it up. And this is one of the reasons why you saw in the 1950s, all of a sudden the West, whether it's the Tavistock in Britain or Laurel Canyon in the United States, the universities, Timothy Leary, all of these, they were using the mysticism and the knowledge that the Nazis had garnered in the 30s and 40s, and they were testing it out and figuring out and expanding it. And of course, they had some of the Nazi scientists and Nazi intelligence people who then helped them to expand it into the programs that we saw going today.
So just to clarify for the listeners, what you're saying is countries like England mainly but maybe France or other countries in Europe, their plan was to have Germany develop all this so they could just attack them and take it, essentially.
It wasn't necessarily a plan, but when they found out what was going on, they allowed it to happen because, nobody was really going to question Germany.
After they started, the plan was, to, whether through war or whatever, to, now we know you're doing this, we're going to, take it from you. And I don't know if I had mentioned to you also, I believe I did, about the show that it goes through if Germany had won the war and it's in the United States and Japan controls the West Coast and the Nazis control the East, and it takes place in like 1963. It's called The Man in the High Castle.
Yeah, and they're actually doing a television show on it over on HBO, I think, or Netflix.
No, it's on Amazon. I had watched it. I watched the whole first season. So if you get a chance to, I don't know if you have Amazon Prime, but even to pay to see it, I thought it was pretty good. I'm just still kind of deciding in my mind, are they leaning towards a show that's really about freedom or not? I would say it definitely reminds people, because you could look at it in a bunch of different ways. You could look at it as, well, look how you have it now compared to you could have it this bad type of thing. I guess I'll have to see what happens in the second season, but it's definitely entertaining and it does have a message in it. So if you're able to, get a hold of that, definitely check it out. So I see regarding your site that the first article on there, I wasn't aware of this at all, is that China is trying to build a road to go all the way to Mexico.
Well, you've heard of the Silk Road project. It's also known as the Belt and Road. It's China's way of resurrecting the old Silk Road. The trade route that used to go across Central Asia and Eurasia into Europe.
And just so for people that know of the Silk Road website, totally different thing was probably named based on this, but that's a totally different thing. So.
Oh, exactly. Yeah, the Silk Road was back in the days like Marco Polo, when Marco Polo went to China from Italy and the 1300s. So the Silk Road was
and then somebody invented that game that you play in the pool where I don't know if you played it as a kid, where you the person who's it closes their
Marco
eyes
Polo,
and
somebody's got to find you. Yeah. No, anyway, the Silk Road, really what it is it's an open, protected, secure trade route. And what China is doing is China is looking, where the U.S. has been using intimidation and force to co-opt countries to stay in the Western cabal and hold on to the petrodollar. China is using economics to achieve the same thing. They're going to build. They've got a blueprint, and they've got most of the countries on board with this. That they're going to build a massive road. It's going to be something like 300 feet or 300 yards, which is like 3 football fields wide.
So
that's going to go from South Korea all across Central Asia, Eurasia, some of the Middle East.
Yeah, I can see it on the map you have here. Are they planning on going with underground roads under the ocean somehow? Or
No, they're going to have sea route channels, but they're planning on having this all across Europe and end up in London. So the original Silk Road 2.0 project is from South Korea all the way across directly to London. Now, this road would be used for two things.
Well, that you could actually drive it where there's no water in between London and China, correct?
Correct. Exactly. Now, the thing about this is this is a commercial only road. It won't be allowed for you and I to go take a trip all the way across.
But to transport like materials, like trucks, more of a truck route to
exactly, because say right today, if China was to take its ships with a bunch of crates, and loading containers, if it was to go around through the Mediterranean and all the different locks there, or go around the Cape of Africa to get to Britain, it takes something like 30 to 35 days.
Yeah, because I see where it would have to go all the way down past South Africa, right? And then back around.
Exactly.
There's no other way to get there. But how long would it take on this road that they're planning on to go from London to China?
14 days.
14 days if you drive straight?
Yep. Exactly.
And that's it, what, like going 60 miles an hour? Well, are they planning on making it, because I would think if it's, as you're saying, it's specifically for trade vehicles, that it's would be like a freeway, like a nonstop type of thing where you can just go, 90 miles an hour through there. I don't know if trucks can go that fast, but
18-wheelers 19 miles.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. I don't know if you can go that
but
fast,
it's going to be big enough that you can have freight going across all the time, both directions. And the thing about it is it's not just a simple road that's going to take from China and China dumps it off, along the way. China is also building, off ramps in certain countries, and the off ramps are going to be tied to, and this is why you see on the map, is it's going to be tied to ports. So if China's like maybe want to send some goods to Madagascar, okay, they're going to drive along the Silk Road, and it's going to detour off, which is still part of the superhighway, the Silk Road superhighway,
to a port,
and then it's going to load onto a ship, and the ship's going to go to Madagascar from the Black Sea or the Mediterranean or wherever.
Is there anything, and I don't even know that they have the technology, I would think they do though, but I'm sure it would be really expensive, but anything possible to do actual underwater roads?
Why would you want to do that? I mean, think about it. The pressure, you'd have to have a self-contained for thousands of miles, pressurized and pumping in air, just so somebody could survive to do that.
Right.
It's one thing creating the channel between France and Britain underneath the Straits of Gibraltar. It's another thing, or the English Channel. It's another thing to do it when you're doing 1,000 miles under heavy ocean.
Yeah, I mean that would be. I know they can do it under like something like a river or something. Whatever that.
Yeah, if you're doing it for a few miles,
they have. Yeah, like they have those that exist that are like like you said, like a few miles under a river or something. But
yeah, the famous channel between France and Britain. So yeah, but no, it'd be more feasible to do it over water. But what China is also doing, okay, and like I said, they're going to use this Silk Road to expand their presence in every continent, in every country, is when they come to certain depots, they're going to build small cities so they can have warehousing there.
Like Home Depot?
Banks. Yeah. They're going to create banks in there. They're going to build their presence, the Chinese presence, all along in every country that the Silk Road is along.
So just to kind of summarize and simplify, so what it would be is there would be stops all along here in certain cities, and within these stops, they might not even be cities. So they would build essentially cities or towns at these stops as well to build up the economy that way also.
Well, yeah, and plus the fact that, if you're gonna ship something to a certain country, those countries have customs, right? They want to make sure that what's coming in their country isn't radioactive, isn't spoiled, isn't arms shipments, isn't things like that. So what these are like off ramps off the Silk Road that customs inspectors and that can check what is coming in to a certain thing. Plus, like I said, if China's selling its productive goods all across the Silk Road, they're not going to have to drive all the way to London and then drive back. What they'll do is they'll have some trucks that are going all the way to London, some to Germany, some to Kazakhstan, some to North Africa, and they're just going to go, wherever this the off ramps lead to. Well, anytime that you have a trade hub, you're automatically going to have a growth of support. And if you have support, then you got to find houses for the workers. Like at any dock. If you go
like
to
within
any
the
port,
U.S., I mean, that's one of the things with the U.S. is there's ports all over the place because of the East and West Coast.
yeah, and so when you have a bunch of workers that are at a specific location, like a port or a warehousing depot or something like that, you start building housing to support these workers. Then if you got residential areas, you're going to have schools, you're going to have
that's what I was saying,
hospitals, you're going to have grocery stores, and so something like that builds upon itself in the centralized places where these trading hubs take place.
Right, that's what I was saying. Where in these places you'd have towns. Most likely, they probably don't have that yet, but they would build up towns around these areas where they stop. So are all, and I assume they would be, but are all the other countries on board with this? And then I would assume that the U.S. would probably be against this.
Oh yeah. Once the Silk Road project, the Belt and Road project started going into fruition over the past 2 years, this is why the U.S. has been forcing and rushing through TPP and TPIP. Because they're trying to get all these countries signed on to their plans, so that otherwise they won't sign on with China's.
Has anything started as far as development or just the plans? I mean, what stage are they at right now?
It's small, but I mean they haven't really built the road to the extent that they that it's going to be. But what they've done is they've created all these bilateral trade pacts with these countries, and this is primarily what the article is talking about is Mexico, which is one of the U.S.'s biggest trade partners. All of a sudden, Mexico is sitting there going, "Wait a second. If we start cultivating new trade pacts with China, then China is going to see us as a destination, a primary port." The road obviously can't go across the Pacific, or it can't go
Yeah, that's what
Atlantic.
I was going to say, that it has to be by boat, obviously.
Right. But if Mexico signs on with China, then China can then start building a road southward through Latin America, through South America, and Mexico could be the primary hub that starts the Silk Road for China going all over Latin America. And what's going to happen? China's going to put a bunch of money in for development. This is going to be a way for Mexico to see technology and development come into the country, just like has happened in Panama City. When the Chinese took over the Panama Canal, you should see what's been happening in the last 20 years in Panama City. My God. I was there when I was in the military. I was there in 1992 to 1994, and it was still a backwards regular place. Now now the skyscrapers and the hotels and the buildings and the construction, there's 120 different countries that have banks in Panama City. This place is becoming a massive trade hub and cultural center.
So
it's like Qatar with all these new buildings, or Miami, the way it is on the
right
there.
So it is China's the one that's going to put a lot of most of the money into this, or are other countries also going to be putting money into it as well, or other private investors, or?
But that's what the AIIB bank, the Asian Infrastructure and Investment Bank,
the new bank that they had created like 6 months ago or whatever.
Bingo. The other countries are going to put money in for development around the globe, but guess who's going to be doing the work? Chinese workers are going to be going all around the world doing the work. As a matter of fact, Dr. Jim Willie, when he does some of his interviews, he talks about every Sunday when he takes his bike rides, he sees all this new construction going up in Costa Rica, and they're being built by Chinese workers there in Costa Rica. So what's the whole point of this for China? Well, militarily, you can try to control a place, but really what made the British Empire expand was that they could use all of their territory to bring economic gain. India was economic gain for Britain. China was economic gain. All of these places, South Africa, De Beers took over the mining industry. It's having access to other countries for economic gain. If you have a Silk Road that's controlled by the Chinese but open to pretty much any of these commercial transports, and China is building all the development around these new shipping hubs, they're bringing in new banks, they can then expand the use of the yuan currency by default. And if all these countries that have been forced to buy dollars all of a sudden can have just direct trade using the yuan and bypass the dollar, what does that do? That uses economics to destroy the U.S. empire.
Right. So will this agreement, which from what I understand you saying, so this agreement is done and finalized. So, right, all the plans are done. It's just a matter of building everything.
The infrastructure, yeah.
So that's where it's at right now. So have all these countries agreed to trade in China's currency as well?
No, but it's accelerating fast. When the IMF approved the yuan for the SDR basket, it de facto made it a reserve currency. There's 5 currencies that are in the SDR. Now, the SDR, for most people to understand, is a form of is a currency that's accepted at the government level, okay, in the banking level. Some Chinese person, some British citizen, some French, South African, we don't use the SDR. It's used primarily for governments when they borrow or they work with the IMF. And the SDR is made up of 5 different currencies: the euro, the dollar, now the yuan, the yen, and the British pound. So when the IMF lends out money to a country, it could be there are certain percentages. I think the yuan starting out with like 10.4%. So say you borrow $20 billion equivalent from the IMF, you're going to get, say, $8 billion in U.S. dollars. You're going to get the yuan.
Sorry about that.
No worries. And then you're going to get a certain percentage of that in other currencies. It allows you to, not be stuck with a singular currency. If you wanted to trade with Europe, say it's Argentina borrowing this money, and they want to trade with Europe, they have a basket of euros from their loan that they can trade with Europe. Same with China, same with the U.S., et cetera, et cetera. That's what the SDR does. But all the currencies that are in the SDR basket are de facto recognized as a reserve currency. They're good anywhere. They're recognized anywhere. You could take a euro to the Ukraine. You could take the Chinese yuan to the Ukraine, and they will convert it for you to whatever currency, the hryvnia.
So
that they use.
What is the main goal, I guess, for China? Of course, part of it is going to be, to make more money, improve their economy. But at the same time, I'm sure they have other aspirations behind that, whether it's, put the U.S. Out of, get rid of the U.S. dollar as a reserve currency, I assume would be one of them. But do they have other ulterior motives behind this also?
Of course they do.
Because it gives them...
China has been empire for 4,000 years. They've waxed and waned, and you know what? If you go back in history, you will find that that empire, the pendulum swings. Back when the Middle Ages and the Dark Ages were going on in Europe, China was running the Silk Road. They had invented gunpowder. They had all. As a matter of fact, there's the story of this one lower class boy who worked in the royal palace, and he became a sailor, and they built this massive amount of ships, and these ships are actually have been recorded to have gone to the North America, what is now the United States, about 100 or 200 or 300 years before Columbus ever did. So the Chinese have already been, were seafarers. They were masters of war. They pretty much had, conquered. That's where they built the Great Wall. They were empire. But over time, they broke apart, and the West started building up. And then the British Empire was empire for a long time. The Roman Empire was but it waxes and wanes. Okay, and the West is waning right now. And Russia, China, India, all of these territories are on the rise. And that's where the new financial center and the new monetary systems are going to come out of. And that's where the new empire is going to go. So China has always thought empire because they have a long history of empire. Same thing with Russia. At the time of Napoleon, Russia was the greatest empire in Europe. Most people don't realize that, and that's why Napoleon desperately wanted to attack them. But everything waxes and wanes, and the United States became empire after World War II, when Europe was devastated, and the U.S. was at its peak in 1991 when the Soviet Union fell. There was nobody to challenge it. But what did the U.S. do instead of cultivating economic gains around the world? They cultivated this neocon absolute dominion, forcing through intimidation and financial economic warfare control over countries. And that's why you saw almost immediately in the 1990s, you had Desert Storm, you had the Balkan Wars in Yugoslavia, and then of course you had everything that we've had in the 2000s.
So are these other countries, because obviously, and this is what I was going to ask, the first thing I thought of when I was looking at the map is also the military access that it would give to all of these countries as well.
Yeah, the Silk Road is going to actually also have a military function. Who controls it, though, is going to be the big question, because it's kind of difficult for China to control the Silk Road when, the portion that's, say, in Germany, and the portion that's in France, and the portion that's in London.
Right.
China's not going to be able to bring their military and camp it out on the Silk Road, but they are going to be part of the security that protects the Silk Road. And then anything in Central Asia, Eurasia, etc., China, Russia, and whoever is part of the military and political alliance that controls the Silk Road is going to have access to it. The only ones who are not going to be able to are residential people like us.
But
no Autobahn for you.
So then I would assume, like, wherever, and I'll go back to the map here, and you can look at this on Ken's site, thedailyEconomist.com. It's the first article there, but and it doesn't show, at least in this. I don't know if you have another picture that shows Mexico, but it shows all these different areas, and in these areas. So the military of, like, it goes through Iraq, actually, and, well, Persia, but same thing. So will it be the responsibility of the Iraq military will they cover their part?
Well, that's a great question. The planning is done, but the infrastructure is not completely built, and not all of the, the details have been ironed out about that. Because you're right, you're dealing with multitudes, dozens and dozens of countries that are going to be involved with this, and there's going to, it's similar to what the U.S., Mexico, and Canada had talked about maybe 5 or 10 years ago. When they were the North American Union,
NAFTA or what?
Yeah, they were gonna have a highway that went from Mexico all the way up through, and this was going to be not as big as the one that the Silk Road is going to be, but say it's going to be like 100 feet or 100 yards, and it's going to be commercial traffic only, and it was going to cut through Texas and Oklahoma and Kansas and all the way up to Canada, and you and I and the normal people would have no access to. As a matter of fact, it would be the security on it would be military grade security, keeping people away from it. But it would facilitate the transport of commercial vehicles back and forth between all three, and then they would take off.
I bet you in that situation, the U.S. would probably, and you're talking about a smaller area as well, where it would be easy for one military to probably help police the whole route. So I bet you in Canada and Mexico, where the road was, that you'd have U.S. troops along with their troops, because the way the U.S. is, they probably insist on it. But here you're talking about a lot of countries, and I can see a scenario where the U.S. breaks part of this by, if you bomb Iraq, then you're taking out part of the fucking road that goes through. So I would think that would be a concern in certain areas of just taking out part of the road.
Well, true, but you got to remember China. China thinks big. One, they have the population to back it, 1.4 billion people. But if you take a look at the Great Wall of China, which goes across thousands of miles, every quarter mile there was a turret, and in that turret a soldier or soldiers would actually live there monitoring the wall. Okay, now if you've got a wall across your entire frontier that's thousands of miles and has a turret that soldiers are living in every quarter mile, do you think that they could do the exact same thing on the Silk Road? Plus the fact,
it's possible, but
yeah. But here's something else: China is already making deals with countries for what I would call virtual. Virtual foreign soil. I wrote an article about 3 years ago. The governor of Idaho had offered a 15-mile swath just outside Boise, Idaho, for the Chinese to create an industrial park, and the Chinese would have absolute control over it.
So it would be like an embassy almost, the pretty equivalent of
exactly.
An embassy.
The diplomatic powers would, it'd be foreign soil. It'd be like an embassy or consulate.
So some of these countries, China could say, okay, well, this portion that's in Iraq, you're a lot more vulnerable than, say, this portion over here. We want to do something like that and say this is Chinese soil. So if anybody attacks that, that's like attacking China.
Right, and I'm sure there's going to be military as well as political treaties that are involved with this. If you think about it, why is Russia in Syria?
Well, I thought they had there a couple of reasons, to get rid of ISIS, but their agreements with Assad I thought they were going to build a pipeline or something.
Bingo.
And
You hit the nail on the head. They already have a port there. They are building a pipeline to bypass the one that is currently in Ukraine that goes to Europe. See, that's where they're going to have coordination with the Syrian government and the Syrian military to protect the pipeline.
Right.
Okay, these are the type of things that you're going to have in the Silk Road as well. You're going to have governments who are going to see the economic value of having commercial products going through, because just when the pipeline goes through, Russia is going to pay Syria a certain portion for allowing the transport of this oil and natural gas through their country. They're getting an economic boom from it. That's going to see the same thing with the Silk Road. Okay, as commercial trucks go through, certain percentage of the tolls or the levies or the customs that you're going to have economic boom in these areas that are economic hubs. And be honest, if the Silk Road goes all the way through to London, and the reason I made the assertion about Mexico is because of the fact that Mexico sees what is happening in China, what's happening in Eurasia, what's happening with all these trade agreements. Mexico is living in poverty.
Right.
They are run by oligarchs who pretty much control everything. Carlos Slim, worth about $80 billion. He controls the entire communications. He controls a lot of this stuff. A few oligarchs control Mexico, and everybody else is dirt poor. Well, Mexico sees the potential of having trade agreements for their resources, their oil through Pemex, and their mines, their resources. They also
but will
want
that
to
even go to the Mexican people, or just go to the people running the country anyway?
Well, what will go to the Mexican people is jobs.
True.
So Mexico wants to get China in there to help build their technology and their industry and their productivity. Okay. In exchange, Mexico is going to sell China cheaper resources for their people. And because Mexico is sitting there going, what does the U.S. do to aid us in our economy?
Gives them guns and then blames it on
well, yeah, I know. But Mexico's economy is pretty much based on illegals being in the United States and sending back $26 billion a year of hard currency from their work here. Mexico, except for Pemex, which is their oil company and is nationalized, Mexico really doesn't have much industry.
Well, drugs, but it's illegal.
But the cartels don't own anything. The people don't have the opportunity to do a lot of work there. So if China comes in, what does China do? Remember what I said? They develop. As a matter of fact, those who hate China like to talk about their human rights abuses, which is not completely a lie, but it's exaggerated to a certain point.
Is it any worse than the human rights abuses in the United States?
What did Britain do in South Africa when they wanted the diamond mines? They sent in mercs. That movie with Leonardo DiCaprio, Blood Diamond or something like that. It's exactly how it is. Okay, they force the South African people to work in the mines. If they have strikes, if they want higher wages, if they want better things, then the British corporations just send in mercs, kill a few people, do all that, and then they're forced to go back and work again. China goes into a place in Africa which has nothing, and they say we want to coordinate with your oil pipelines. So they start building developments. They bring in the internet. They bring in schools. They start building. They develop these places for the Africans in exchange for the rights to their resources. That's the biggest difference between the old European colonialists.
Well, they would just
and
come
what
in and
China
take
is
them.
trying to do. And if China is developing things using their own money, what do you think the people of a country are going to do? They're going to sit there and go, we are friends with China. Look what China is doing. And then all of a sudden, China, one by one, economically takes over the world rather than militarily.
That's the end game there. So I want to take a quick break, and then I want to talk about, because I think this is a very important story here. I want to talk about what does this lead to, not only for the United States, but their end game there, as far as whether it's just a economic domination, or after economic domination, it's a military domination. So we'll take a break, and we'll talk all about that when we come back. NonpartisanLibertyForAll.com. And be sure to check out Ken, and you can read this whole article at the dailyeconomist.com, and of course many other articles that Ken writes on do you put articles up there every day or every other day? Or I know you put a lot of stuff up there.
Yeah, I usually update the Daily Economist every 2 days because I write on 3 different other sites.
Right.
So I sort of aggregate them to the Daily Economist every few days.
Okay. But yeah, it's definitely a site where you'll get a lot of good information that you're not going to get from the government media, where I'm sure they're not talking anything about this. So we'll be right back right after this. And check us out at nonpartisanlibertyforall.com.
As Carter announcing today, the reality is we are at war. And Secretary Carter telling Congress the U.S. needs to step up the fight against ISIS.
The reality is we're at war. That's how our troops feel about it, because they're taking the fight to ISIL every day.
Former U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Ambassador John Bolton, goes on the record. Ambassador, the Secretary of Defense announcing we are at war. We haven't heard that from the President, I don't think, at any point, but we are at war. Stunning.
Well, at least you get truth at some level of this administration. And I think given what military witnesses have been saying in congressional hearings for the past several weeks, Secretary Carter didn't really have any choice. I think this is significant. I think our fellow citizens should see it as significant because for 7 years, Barack Obama has said we are not in a global war against terrorism. This is a law enforcement matter. It can be handled through the criminal justice system. And that is simply not true.
Well, the two at the top of the food chain on this are the Secretary of Defense and the President. And if they both have different views of what's going on, well, they're busy trying to hashing this out and disagreeing and everything about it. Meanwhile, it doesn't look particularly good what's happening as ISIS grows.
Well, exactly. And while it has suffered some reverses at the hands of the Kurds and others, basically ISIS continues to expand. It continues to consolidate its control over the territory it holds. And the United States and its allies are not acting effectively against it.
Would it be more of an impact if the United States Congress, consistent with its constitutional powers, would actually issue a declaration of war? I mean, everyone says we're at war with ISIS. Now the Secretary of Defense says, and for someone, everybody dances around it in Congress. I mean, Republicans have been screaming about the president not doing anything. Why don't they just declare war? They have the constitutional power.
Well, it would be a political gesture, but honestly, I'm not sure we've ever declared war against anything other than a nation state.
Well, maybe we ought to start.
And well,
if the Secretary of Defense says we're at war, why don't we, dot our I's and cross our T's?
Why don't we have a House and Senate joint resolution that recommends the Secretary of Defense talk to the President? I think that would be more important.
How about invoke Article 9 of the NATO treaty?
Well, you could do a lot of things, but frankly, I think as long as the President doesn't get it, the political gestures actually harm us because it shows our inability or unwillingness under this president to do what's really necessary, which is to use force effectively. And I think what we're seeing now is that this terrorist attack in San Bernardino didn't depend on ISIS. It didn't depend on the husband being radicalized by the wife. These people were pledging loyalty to the Muslim Brotherhood well before this. This terrorist threat has been around for a long time, and our failure to address it is going to cause us a lot more of these incidents in the near future, I'm afraid.
Ambassador, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Well, let's now talk to political journalist and author Gerard O'Coleman, who joins us from Paris this evening. Thanks very much for joining us again on RT International. You're in the French capital. What's the mood and atmosphere in the city right now?
We're being told that there's a state of war and a state of emergency. We've had this before. We had this in January, and for several weeks we had non-stop sirens and non-stop chatter on the radio about the threat from radical Islam and terrorist groups and so on. And so we're having a kind of a replay of that, but it has been, I think, accentuated, and we're going to have an intensification of the media campaign, which is essentially a propaganda campaign to make people in France fear Muslims. We need to be clear about the origin of the war on terror. The war on terror is, I quote, orchestrated from abroad. These are the words François Hollande used to describe this terrorist attack. Well, the attacks that have been continuing to destroy Syria, to massacre its population, have also been orchestrated from abroad. They were orchestrated by NATO, and they've been carrying these attacks out against the civilian population of Syria for 4 years now. And this is a terrorist campaign that is also orchestrated from abroad. And people in Europe need to understand that there is a war that is becoming global, that is being waged against civilian populations in particular. It is a form of neo-imperialism and neo-colonialism which aims to divide and conquer European and Middle Eastern and African and the world's population, for that matter, and to make them submit to a global order that does not serve the interests of most of the people on this planet, but that does serve the interests of a very few ruling elite, a very small, tiny, and particularly tyrannical ruling elite. There is no war on terror. There is a war that is being waged using proxy groups, terrorist proxy groups, and they are being used against nation states who are resisting U.S. and Israeli hegemony, and they are also being used as a means of disciplining the workforces in Europe. In a period of mass unemployment and austerity, you now have terrorist attacks being committed by terrorists funded, armed and trained by Western intelligence agencies. There is no such thing as ISIS. ISIS is a creation of the United States. We know that from official sources of the U.S. military themselves. Declassified documents from the Defense Intelligence Agency have confirmed that. And the French government is now attempting to drum up support for more military intervention in Syria. And what they want to do is they want to get in on the game. The game is almost lost. The Russians have routed much of the Islamic State. You now have Islamic State militants coming into Europe disguised as refugees. That will destabilize Central Europe, and the French government wants to get in on the game in Syria and prop up those so-called moderate rebels. There are no moderate rebels, of course, in Syria. There are Al-Qaeda and ISIS militants, terrorists who have been beheading people, eviscerating people, absolutely creating chaos and genocide right across the region, and this does not serve the Syrian people or anyone other than the Western corporate elites and their geopolitical interests.
What do you expect France to do now in the light not only of Friday's terrorism, but 10 months on from Charlie Hebdo? It's not going to ease up on what it's doing, is it?
No. Much depends on how the French public will react. Whether if they will are being bombarded now with a media propaganda campaign. There's this non-stop talk where we're told not to go out in the street. We're supposed to be fearful and keep quiet and so on. I think there is going to be a campaign against dissidents in France. They're very worried about the new media that has emerged in recent years, and they are very worried about the alternative media. So I think there you will see, we saw this actually after the attacks in January, you will see a conflation of terrorism and dissidents. So one of the tools which the mass media uses to discredit any kind of rational questioning of the established order, and particularly the war on terrorism, is to deride those who would question the war on terrorism as conspiracy theorists. And I think you're going to see a crackdown on so-called conspiracy theorists and websites that actually publish rational and honest analysis of what is happening. So you're going to see more of that type of intellectual terrorism, which is already at boiling point in France. I mean, it's got to the point now where you have professors in universities who are being intimidated. You have school teachers who are basically being fired for even suggesting that there may be a link between French imperialism and terrorism. There was one case recently, for example, of a school teacher who almost lost his job when he suggested there might be a link between French foreign policy and terrorism. So we are going through a period of deep intellectual terrorism. And of course, these random terrorist acts, which are a form of low-intensity civil war. I think that the current crisis, the refugee crisis, which is really a form of coercive engineered migration, because they could have easily been prevented, this form of coercive engineered migration is going to make this a lot worse, and it is going to create the conditions of civil war. It is a natural consequence, of course, of globalization, of financial capitalism. This is essentially what it leads to. I mean, it leads to a breakdown of society. And the only way in which they can kind of keep everybody down is by a policy of divide and conquer. So you're going to see a situation where you've got very much a Wahhabized working class in France. They're being Wahhabized by the allies of the French political elite, the Saudis and the Qataris. They're building Wahhabite mosques all over the place. And that is going to Wahhabize the youth, and they're going to be then used as pawns, if you like, in much bigger geopolitical wars, proxy wars against Russia, proxy wars against Iran in the Middle East, and so on. And that is going to create massive social unrest. It's going to divide working people against each other. And the only people who are going to actually benefit from this are the war contractors, the military-industrial media intelligence complex. So in whatever way you look at this, I don't know who exactly committed this attack and this atrocity, but the real people who are responsible, whether directly or indirectly or consciously or unconsciously, is the French government, because they have been complicit in terrorism in the Middle East and all over Africa. And that needs to be understood. And if we don't understand that, this is going to continue and it's going to deteriorate. We will find ourselves in a situation under military law, martial law, if this continues. So it really needs to be analysed and understood.
Can I pick you up on the issue of migrants and refugees? Because one of the terrorists appears to have been a French citizen, another a recent migrant to the country. What do you think this will do to France's policies towards the migrant crisis?
Well, I think there is sufficient evidence to suggest strongly, in fact, that the current crisis, I mean, the migration crisis is something that is ongoing, and there are different waves. You've got different waves coming up from Libya, you've got the ones coming up from Syria and up through the Balkans. But the current kind of refugee crisis, as it were, is what I would refer to as coercive engineered migration. This is a term used by Kelly Greenhill, a US academic, who wrote an interesting book on this, whereby she shows that migration can be used as a tool by one state to destabilize another state. In this case, it's definitely being used by the United States and Turkey to destabilize the Balkans, Mitteleuropa, which would be Hungary, and of course Germany. And the geostrategic reasons of this are basically go back to classical geopolitics, which is Halford Mackinder's theory of dividing the world island. That is to say, you divide the Eurasian Peninsula from the Baltic Sea to the Black Black Sea, you create an intermarium there so that you prevent German and Russian unity. And that is why Germany essentially is being kind of overrun with people who are themselves victims of globalization, but they are now being instrumentalized and used as weapons of globalization. And this is one of the key contemporary strategies of U.S. imperialism. You use the consequences of globalization as further tools to further globalization. And I think there is no policy in Europe to control immigration or anything like that. I think that the key question here is not actually controlling immigration. The key question is stopping this geopolitical destabilization of Europe. And some countries are attempting to do that. Hungary is attempting to do that. Bulgaria is attempting to a certain extent to do that. In other words, trying to find out who's an actual refugee and who isn't. They're prioritizing women and children, for example, in Hungary. That's a rational approach. But of course, Viktor Orban of Hungary is being demonized by the European Union for his insistence on implementing the laws of the European Union and of a Hungarian nation state. Here, you're in a situation where the French government is totally subordinate to U.S. dictates. This is a country that has been completely taken over by U.S. imperialism, just as Germany. And France doesn't really have a foreign policy. It does whatever Washington tells it to do.
OK, it's always good to get your thoughts on this. Gerard O'Connor, thanks very much for joining us from Paris this Saturday evening. Well.
Promoting the ideas of true freedom and liberty, nonpartisan liberty for all radio with Dave Bourne.
And that is me. I am Dave Bourne, and this is Nonpartisan Liberty for All. We are here on this Tuesday night with the Daily Economist, Ken Schortgen, who I need to turn that off, of course, first, before I turn this up. As I was saying, we are here with Ken Schortgen of the Daily Economist. You can check him out at thedailyeconomist.com. So we're talking all about essentially a trade route that China is building that could go even as far as Mexico. It's part road, part, I guess, ship. Anything you would add to that, Ken, as far as just a summary for anybody just tuning in?
No, it's a way for China to have access to pretty much all of its trade countries, and Mexico, by wanting to move more into China's camp rather than the U.S.'s camp, the potential, there's nothing in stone. So they are not part of the Silk Road right now. I threw the article out there as the potential of Mexico being the primary hub if China wants to expand into North America, Central America, South America. If Mexico is the primary hub, then they can go ahead and start, recreate a road from somewhere in Mexico, one of the ports or inland, and then go straight down through the isthmus and into South America. So there's a lot of expansion that's going on, and something that, we had ended the last segment on regarding, what's China's ultimate goal. Well, I'm not going to lie. Just like every country, it's empire.
So, and we were starting to talk about that it's, goal being its empire and its economy, but after building its economy, because obviously that's what this will do, it will make it easier for them to trade with people, so they will be trading a lot more, and they will have a lot more exports and make a lot more money off of them. And the thing with China that's different with other countries, and I don't know how exactly this is set up, but they're a communist country, So but they're partially not. How does it exactly work with corporations in China and the government?
Well, China is communist politically, but they are capitalist economically. Let me give you an example. You know which country has the most women billionaires? China. China has more women billionaires than the United States, than Europe. As a matter of fact, here's the interesting thing. Only 7 to 14% of all the women billionaires in the United States, and we're talking like the Walmart children, et cetera, 7 to 14% of the billionaires who are women in Europe and the United States, they earn their money. The other 70 or 84% who are billionaires, they inherited it or they got it in a divorce from a man who was a billionaire.
So you're talking about in the U.S.,
right?
Like you would take John Kerry's wife there. She got her money from the Heinz guy, right?
Right.
And now Kerry's has that money that originally came from her husband in the first place. So you're saying in the U.S. that is the case, but in China the case is that they actually built up their own companies or built something up, and that's why they're a billionaire.
Right. Half the women who are billionaires in China earned every penny of their money.
And how is that with most people would say in China, women aren't regarded, at least when they're kids, how they have a limitation on the amount of children and they care less about the female children than the male children. Is that still the case over there? And
well, actually, earlier this year, maybe about 2 or 3 months ago, they removed the one-child policy. And the reason the one-child policy was predominantly male and they got rid of all the girls, it isn't because they don't love daughters. It's because of the culture. In China, the eldest male is supposed to take care of the parents when they're in their elder years.
Well, if you got females that are making a lot of money over there, they can do it too.
But for thousands of years, it wasn't that way. This is a new phenomenon. You got to remember too, China really came into its own in the middle 1970s. There was I think his name was Deng Xiaoping, but I probably wrong on that, who got together after Mao died and pretty much threw away the entirety of Mao's economic policies. Because what ended up happening is Mao was a farmer, and like Fidel Castro, who was a dairy farmer before he took power, any intellectual, any business owner, any of that, he despised and he had them killed. That's where the 60 million were killed. Okay, so Mao took farmers and said, "You're going to be the new scientist." It just doesn't work that way, and that's why even China back into during the Mao years was absolutely horrendous economically. You can't put round pegs into square holes, and so when they did the reforms in the middle 1970s, especially shortly after Nixon went to China and started saying, you know what, we're going to start building up China as an economic power. And and interestingly enough, the reason that Nixon did that was they thought that China's communism was different than Russia's communism, so that if they built up China, China would be an enemy to the Soviet Union, and would be an ally to the United States. For a while it was, but the Chinese realized that they weren't going to really become a world power unless they had capitalism. So they started making a lot of reforms, a lot of changes. China from the local level all the way to the Communist Party level is corrupt. So you've got centuries of all this corruptness, just like in Mexico, that they slowly got to get out of. And look at what China has done. China conned the United States, especially through Bill Clinton, into shipping all of the industry over to China. And now China, the only thing that the United States produces is the dollar.
So like all the manufacturing and all of that.
Yeah.
So are they still paying? Because I know initially they moved it all to China because it was a lot cheaper. Is it still, are the people still making nothing over there? Or
some are, but think about it. Like I just said, you got the highest number of billionaires are being manufactured in China. Jack Ma, who runs Alibaba.
Well, when you look at numbers, though, too, are you looking at percentages or?
Yeah,
because there's a lot more people.
Yeah, you want to look at it as but China, China if you take it percentage wise per capita, China actually now has more middle class growth than the United States does, than Europe does. China is number one in the growing the middle class. So a lot of the talk about the slave labor, yeah, there is cheap slave labor that Nike and Apple and a lot of those use, but there's a lot of companies that are primarily Chinese that it's not that way. People are able to buy cars. They're able to buy the Apple phones and all these things that they manufacture. The Chinese.
So at some point, will those jobs stay where they're at, or will those jobs the salaries go up there, and the U.S. companies move them back?
Well, here's the dichotomy. The U.S. after NAFTA shipped all their industry to get to cheap labor in China. When the dollar finally dies, and the Chinese yuan becomes the most used currency in the world, then China is going to ship its industry back to the United States and hire cheap labor called Americans. That's exactly what's going to happen.
So I know you had not specifically predicted that, but had before said that essentially the U.S. is headed towards being a third world country.
Yep. When the dollar's gone, the only thing the United States exports is dollars. You remove that, and we export nothing. We are the largest debtor nation in the world. Pretty much everything at Walmart, in Kmart, in Target, all these are made in China. We make nothing. Well, if we don't import stuff, then how are we going to eat? How are we going to clothe ourselves? How are we going to have all this thing? And if the world's not accepting the dollar, how are we going to pay for it?
So don't these companies, I'm sure, they're aware that at some point that's going to be the scenario. So if they wanted to, they could start bringing back manufacturing to the U.S. Of course, they're not going to do that because it's going to cost them more money. But they just don't give a fuck because they only care about themselves, I guess, in that
multinational
scenario.
Corporations are without borders. They're beyond borders.
But
they have no allegiance to a country.
I'm sure that they're aware of what's going on, that could be the scenario, that's where the U.S. is going. I mean, just like before the housing crash, they knew it was going to happen and they sold their stock and things like that. So are they just looking more out for themselves and, okay, well, how do I avoid this? And I'll buy an island somewhere, or I'll move here and fuck everybody else.
The Fed and quantitative easing, and then the TARP and the bailouts in 2008, the whole encompassing is $29 trillion. How much of that has actually been put into the general economy in the United States to create jobs? Virtually zero.
I thought none, that most of it's going to prop up the stock market.
So you just answered your question. what are they? They are locusts. Okay, they are reaping up every piece of wealth that they can, knowing that the United States is going to be desolate and that the people are going to have nothing. That is their mentality. Okay, and when you suddenly have the desolation and you have no industry and whatever, what has China been doing? I think I mentioned on your show before, China owns 60% of South Manhattan. They bought up all the commercial property. They've bought up industrial parks in Pittsburgh, Idaho, New York, Ohio, and another place. Okay, industrial parks in Detroit, industrial parks that have left that the United States doesn't use anymore, but all the factories and the machines are still there. Chinese bought it all up, and eventually they're going to retool it, and that's where they're going to have the American workers come in and start manufacturing Chinese goods. And see, China's not stupid. The difference between China and Russia and the United States is the United States plays checkers. We only think one move ahead. China and Russia have been planning this for decades.
And they play chess.
And they think of things not in 5-year plans. They think of things in 500-year plans. They have a plan of what's going to happen here. The United States, okay, they're not looking prepared for when the collapse comes.
The only place I would disagree is in their plans as far as what they have planned for the American people and how they over years and years have been taking more control and all of that. But that would probably be the only place where they're actually looking long term.
Well, here's something you got to think about. If China is primarily a production industry, don't people have to have money to buy stuff? So you're not going to impoverish your workers completely. You want them making enough money to buy your goods. This
right,
is why,
of course.
Yeah, so this is why they're developing in all the places that they go, because they're creating consumers.
So what ultimately are they going to do once they establish this? So let's assume that all of this goes through. They're able to establish this big economic boom based on all of these trade routes, and they're exporting so much more and making so much more money. Where do they go next? Are they satisfied with that, or or not just that, but continuing to expand the economy, of course? But do they say, okay, well, we're at the same time building up economically, so we can take over in certain areas. We can start to take over the world, if not, certain countries.
Yeah, well, they're not looking for jackboot thuggery, feudalism type thing. They're looking for economic control. And to be honest, if your currency is the primary currency being used around the world, if you are the boss and own the companies that people work for, you don't have to dominate a country. You have control still. And of course, corporations, buy politicians to pass the policies and the programs that they want. You can't really see it. China is not really out there to do like Imperial Japan was in World War II. Come in with the soldiers and force everything and put everybody into bondage, take all the Chinese and Korean women and make them into concubines. No, they're not interested in that at all. No, they're interested in control through economics. And, there's an old saying that says, who is really your master? The one who rules you or the one who gives you a paycheck?
Right, and that's something I'm actually doing a show on later this week about the corporations and how much your job really essentially controls you, because that's, without that, what do you have? They can fire you at any minute, and you're only as good as the last thing you've done. And that's how corporations see people. It's, what have you done for me lately? It doesn't matter what you've done over the course of your time with that company usually. It just matters, what have you done lately for that company?
Right. And, the bottom line is, if you work for somebody, there are always rules. There's dress codes. There's sexual harassment training, that, things you can't do, can't say. It's when you work for somebody else, they don't have to impose a mandatory thing on you necessarily, because the threat is always there that they'll fire you and you won't have money. So they can make you do things that are unconstitutional or against your rights and your civil liberties. They can do that with the threat that they can always fire you and get somebody else who's willing to put up with the garbage.
Right.
This is the problem throughout history. I know that the libertarians and the anarcho-capitalists think that the world is going to be without a government. You got to realize that the amount of people throughout history have always demanded a ruler. If you go back to the Bible, God put before the Hebrews judges with limited dominion over, and control. But the people saw the other kingdoms and they said, "We want a king. We want a king." So they installed their own king. People, for the most part, want somebody to rule over them. I hate to say it. You would think that freedom would be enough, but it's not. Most people want somebody to rule over them. Ivan the Terrible in Russia, he left, and then the situation became so chaotic that the people begged Ivan the Terrible to come back, even after all the atrocity he had done. So
that's crazy.
You got to realize too, those who work for a company, those who work for somebody else, they are your masters in many different ways. This is why being an entrepreneur is freedom.
Well, that's why.
But most people cannot be entrepreneurs because, one, they don't have the drive, they don't have the vision, they don't have the self-discipline, they don't take responsibility for their actions, and they're not good stewards of money.
Well,
so
that's
if you take
big.
out all those, then you're going to have most of the people wanting somebody else to take their taxes out for them, to give them their paycheck, to tell them what to do.
That's a big part of it, but the other side of it is the government is making the borders, or what is it called exactly? The not borders to entry, but the to get into an industry and what stands in your way.
Oh, you mean the regulations of starting a business?
Yeah, but it's called something. I think it's borders, not borders to entry.
Let me get an example. But that's thinking in the old school. When people think about starting a business, they think of Main Street, and they deal with the overhead, and maybe a franchise or starting a computer company, and so you got to rent a place, and you got to do all the regulations about that. Maybe you want a food truck, and you got to do all the. You know what? The thing about it is we have the internet. You know how much my website cost me to build?
Probably not that much, because mine didn't cost me that much neither.
$8. I got a URL from GoDaddy. I got free Google Blogger, and there were free templates that I put out, and I built it exactly the way I want.
Yeah, I built mine too. It's not that expensive to build a website, and then I probably paid in total for like 5 years, maybe like $100 for like 5 years or something, or 150.
Exactly, and with a little bit of work and not a lot of cost, it's like with Carrot Bars. You know what? You put a few $100s in, which you would pay more for licensing and permits from the government to have any type of brick and mortar business. You can start a business not just with Carrot Bars, but with others for a few $100s, and it's just the diligence of the work, and all of a sudden you've got all your money back, and now you're making money. It's a mindset. A lot of the people who are sitting on welfare now used to work the auto industry lines, the assembly lines in Detroit, because that's all they knew, and they never thought to go beyond that, realizing that things end. Back in the early 1900s, all those people who used to build wagons, when the automobile came, millions of people were out of work because the entire industry and everybody who supported that industry was gone. What are they going to do? You have to be able to adapt. You have to be able to change. You have to be able to see the things and put the things. And most people don't have the discipline to do it.
No, I agree with you there, but I'm saying at the same time, and it's barriers to entry. The barriers to entry, certain businesses are getting harder and harder. And I don't think that you can deny that. Now, everything you said, I agree with you that you have all these other reasons that people don't have the drive or they don't think they can do it or whatever psychological reason they may have, or laziness or any of those. But at the same time, it is true that the barriers to entry when it comes to certain businesses is getting harder and harder because of the government and corporations and them passing regulations purposely that help out whoever's already in business and make it harder for new people that want to get in business.
And this is why Princeton University determined that the United States is an oligarchy. It's fascist, okay? We are no longer truly capitalist. And this is why China is growing and expanding, because they are more capitalist. Think about this. The number 2 richest man in China, okay? He was number 1 until his stock value went down. Jack Ma, who runs Alibaba, it's like the equivalent of Amazon over in China.
Right.
He started out as a school teacher. He taught English in a school. He started an online e-commerce business, and it grew. Okay? This is in China. You think you can do that here in the United States?
Well,
in Silicon Valley,
you look at the economic freedom charts from whoever it may be. What's that? The Heritage Foundation puts them out. There's a couple other companies that put them out. The United States is like not even in the top 20 in most of them, or they're right around 20 or something. When it comes to economic freedom, they're just not there anymore.
Now, why did yours, mine, and whoever's ancestors come to the United States in the 1800s and early 1900s? To try to find a better life that they couldn't get in Europe.
Right. Now it's, Europe's not a good example, but there are other countries, because those don't end up that high neither. If you want to talk about economic freedom, Western Europe is not the place to go. It's a lot of the Asian countries actually now, Singapore and Thailand, and I think are, I don't know if I have that right with Singapore, but I believe so. There's a lot of the Asian countries and even some, I think, in Eastern Europe. But Europe itself, and even South America, there's a few down there that are like Chile is one of them.
Panama.
But
no, my point is that our ancestors left Europe, primarily Europe, to come to the United States for a better life because they, think about it. You know what Europe, the epitome of was? Read Charles Dickens, Oliver Twist, child labor, living in poverty. Okay, in the Industrial Revolution, that was Europe in the time when most of the immigration came to the United States for a better life. Now, 100, 150 years later, the United States is in decline. Why don't we, as think about what our ancestor did and start looking, where is the next economic, growth? Where is the boom? It's in Asia. You're dead right. Singapore, Thailand, China, Vietnam, even. These are the places and a lot of industrialists have moved there. Jim Rogers, billionaire, is in Singapore.
Well, the problem is that you have countries that have economic freedom but don't have the social freedoms, and then you have vice versa. So it's hard to find a place. It depends what you're looking for. Ultimately, I don't think it really matters where you go, because eventually, government is everywhere, and a government, to me, their plans are to ultimately rule over as much as they can and control as much as your life.
Think about
as
it.
they can.
We'll go through this real quick, and if somebody wants to go out to YouTube, you can find this very cool video of Trey Gowdy speaking to somebody from Homeland Security regarding, I think not the Patriot Act, but the no-fly list. And he started going through. He says, where can the no-fly list supersede the First Amendment? And he said the Second Amendment, and just laid it all through. Think about this: the government is not ending free speech. People are. College kids at about 4 different universities. There was a story that came out. They are screaming to their administrators to curtail free speech if it's offensive. The government's not doing this. These are programmed millennials who have grown up under political correctness.
Well, that's why the government has done it in a sense, because they have programmed people.
Right.
So
but if the
government has done it in a way.
In a way, yes. But if the people then are demanding these things without government interference, look at what's going on with the shooting. Every time there's some type of shooting, there's the Second Amendment's being trying to be taken away. Then you have due process. That's what the no-fly list is. They can put you on the no-fly list, and they don't tell you.
Oh,
so
yeah,
you don't
and
know
that's
you're on it. And then of course there's no due process.
Right.
They said,
and they want to take your guns away. And
right,
people are so stupid that they have. Sorry to interrupt, but according to, and I don't know what poll it was, but according to a lot of these polls, a huge percentage of Americans think if you're on the no-fly list that you shouldn't be able to get a gun.
And see, it's the public opinion because of political correctness and because of all this. So,
well, I don't know if they realize what the process is to get on the no-fly list, that they just put you on there. I mean, it's insane, because basically they could use it to keep guns away from whoever they want.
And now you just answered my question, or you just affirmed my point. If people don't have the discipline, the vision, the monetary stewardship, the work ethic to build their own business, to have freedom, then how are they ever going to find the same attributes to research all these things that the government's doing, that the schools are doing, that any of these doing to stop it?
Yeah, they're not, and that's why.
And the final conclusion is, if the United States is coming to a point where all the great liberties that our forefathers gave to us, that we have squandered away because we never stood up to them, then what is that any different than going to where you can have economic freedom in the Far East and maybe you have a few restrictions? Well, you have these restrictions now in the United States and you don't have economic freedom. So,
Right. Well, in the U.S., it's not just economic freedom. Obviously, it's every freedom that is going away, and not only that, is that they want to take away more economic freedom as well as, of course, more personal freedom. But you have people like Bernie Sanders who want to tax more and more. You have even some Republicans that want to tax more. So what's going to happen, and I had said this before, I don't know if it was to you or not, that he bases things off of what things are now. and says, oh, yeah, the U.S. can afford it. Look at all the tax money. Not realizing that once they implement that, all that money is gone because the companies are gone, whether they leave the country or just go out of business and retire because they don't want to deal with the shit or whatever. So
that's why an ideologue should never be a politician, because it's like, look at the climate change garbage that's being pushed around. You know, in the end, people are like, yeah, we got to save the climate, save the environment, save this and that. And then all of a sudden they don't realize that, okay, you're going to move from your 1,500 square foot house. They're going to force you into 300 square foot to lower your carbon footprint. You're not going to be able to own a car, you know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, all in the name of saving the environment. But all these people, including Bernie Sanders, will continue to live in mansions because Bernie Sanders is part of the oligarchy. You don't see the rich liberals who are demanding that everybody else pay taxes and everybody else give up their liberties. You don't see them doing it themselves. Okay? They don't contribute to charities, but they sure as heck try to make you feel guilty to do the same thing. This is why even the Trumps, you know, Donald Trump is a phenomenon. The frequency of America is standing, you know, something's wrong. It's like a sliver in your mind, and they're standing up against political correctness and being called racist and white guilt and immigration and, you know, all this stuff, terrorism. They're tired of war. All these things are coming to a head, and Donald Trump is the perfect person to come in and say outrageous things against them, speaking for something that most Americans are afraid to, because they don't want to be called a racist, they don't want to be called a bigot, they don't want to be called a homophobe, they don't want to, you know, they want to be called, so Trump can get away with it, and people are standing up with him because nobody else is tackling the issues. You know, Trump is a revolutionary.
He's also an arrogant ass, and
well, yeah, but everybody's got.
He shows no. I know what you're saying, and I agree with you to a point. But I also think that it shows the ignorance of the majority of people in America that they're supporting this fucking retard, because really, it's just the, you know, the whole persona and the attitude and I remember when he used to call in to Howard Stern and he'd brag about his show and how he's richer than these other guys, and it's all ego with him. It's just, right, but I don't even know if this is serious, if this is just a joke to him. I know your point being that, well, he's saying all these things that people agree with to an extent, but are scared to say. I don't know if that's the whole truth, but some of the stuff that he's saying is just insane to me.
Well, yeah, but what my ultimate point is Donald Trump would not be a very good leader. Okay.
No, not at all. He's a fucking. I think he's an idiot.
He is an egotistic narcissist. Okay, that's why when you take a look at the surface. Look at Obama when he said hope and change. Well, he changed all right. He made the country socialist. He pretty much divided everybody. So anybody with critical thinking skills will automatically take out what a political candidate says and will instead research and see what has he done. Okay, so you know, like whether it's Cruz, Rubio, Rand Paul, Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders. What have they done over the past 10, 20 years? Okay, that's what they're going to do when they get in office. Not what they're saying on TV because they wanted to say things people want to hear. Look, if you take a look at Russia in 1918, they were impoverished. They were rebellion. They wanted to overthrow the Tsar.
That's right. Before my great grandparents came over, they came over in 1913, right before they became communists.
And see, people then were willing to give up a modicum of a monarchy to instead have absolute, authoritarianism under communism. It's one of those things that be careful what you wish for, because you just might get it. whenever a government is ousted by force,
it's not a positive thing. But
right,
sorry,
99
go
out
ahead.
of 100 times, what fills the vacuum of the void is not something better. It's usually
it's something worse.
Exactly.
That's why these people that talk about, well, we need another revolution. Yeah, and who's going to be what's going to replace the current system? That's why I don't believe in any of that. If anything, it's get the hearts and minds and get people to not comply, and things will dissolve on their own.
There's only one real way to change the country, and that is,
in your opinion,
if all the governors got together and said, you know what, we're tired of federalism, we're tired of everything being run out of Washington, D.C., they'll get together with a constitutional convention and overthrow and rechange everything. There's not a single thing that D.C., that Congress, whatever, can do, because the Constitution can be changed or adapted or modified by the states alone just as much as it can be done by Congress, and then the states vote for it.
Right, but I'd still have a problem with that because, as I have said, it will just become the same thing over and over again, because that's what government is. Government, you give people power over you, and they're going to take as much power as possible. It doesn't matter if it's on a state level or a federal level or a city level. It's irrelevant. That's, to me, my definition of government is to take as much power and control as you possibly can. So that's all the time we have left. If you want to just add anything real quick before we go, that's fine.
I think we talked some good stuff, especially the Silk Road is something, the end goals of what's going on we were seeing economically, and the potential of the vacuum that's going to be filled when the dollar falls and the U.S. loses a little bit of monetary control over the system.
Yeah, I mean, that's... I just would be concerned with what the United States government is going to do, whether they're going to try to somehow stop it and do it in a way where, like what they're doing with ISIS right now, where they'll do it in a way where they'll have the CIA do something where they can't tie it back, or at least can't publicly tie it back, or can't 100% tie it back to the U.S. government, or things like that. No,
they're going to create a war. That's what they're doing.
Well,
we just sent troops into Iraq.
Do that
we sent troops into Syria, and they're trying to egg on Russia to have a global war. This is why the United States is trying to create a global war to mask the economic and financial crisis that is coming upon us very quickly. That way they can blame the war, they can blame Russia, they can blame everybody else instead of themselves and their bad policies. This is what people need to look at, is we are going into a war era, just like in 1914 to 1918, World War I. This is exactly what's going to happen, and it's going to take Russia, it's going to take China, it's going to take Iran and Syria to have the will and fortitude not to fall for what the U.S. is trying to do.
Like trick them into, yeah.
Just like the Russian jet that was shot down by Turkey. Turkey didn't do that on their own. Turkey was doing it to protect the ISIS supply lines, but they were told by somebody to go ahead and do it. Because Turkey, they can be insane, but really, do you want Russia to just go in and nuke your country?
Right.
No. Somebody told them. And Turkey is part of NATO, and NATO is controlled by the U.S.
Right.
Follow the dominoes. This is what the world is coming to. So,
well, we'll have to follow this closely and see what happens, and hopefully it won't lead to a war. But the United States usually they've been fighting wars for who knows how many years now. So that's all the time we have for tonight. Thanks again, Ken, for joining us, and check him out at the dailyeconomist.com. You can read that article as well as others. I will be back on Thursday unless something happens and I don't end up going to my Christmas party tomorrow night. But other than that, I will be back on Thursday with our new co-host, Vivian Fire, will be joining us. So I'm excited about that. So hopefully I will, or you will, hear me on the Thursday. Thanks, everybody.
We will defend these police officers.
Listen to police officers' commands, listen to what we tell you, and just stop. The nation needs to realize that when we tell you to do something, do it. And if you're wrong, you're wrong. If you're right, then the courts will figure it out.
We don't get to take the law, we enforce it. But at the end of the day, each and every American should go home safe. Sometimes the use of force is necessary. You need to comply with the police officer, the way the system was meant to be. Comply with the orders of police officers. Resisting arrest is a real and dangerous